That night, where it all began, I remember it as if it were yesterday, in those eerie swamps of Morthal, stretching out under a moonless sky, a black mire of stagnant pools and gnarled half-dead trees, wreathed in that fog. Morthal, the fog never leaves. The air was thick as usual, with that hum of insects and the scent of decay. How anybody lives in this place, I'll never know. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a soft chiming of a nirnroot by the water, a lonely and ghostly note echoing through that night mist. Each step I took on that sodden ground was careful and silent, my tail twitching for balance as I navigated the marsh by faint starlight. Behind me, the distant lights of Morthal flickered and vanished in the haze, until I was well and truly alone in the dark. What in oblivion was I doing out there? What do you think? Chasing treasure? What else would I be doing? I'd caught wind of a rumor in the Moorside Inn that an old manor on the edge of the Drakmere Marsh lay abandoned. Problem is, it was also cursed. Locals whispered of strange lights, eerie noises, and they all shunned the place. But I don't pay much attention to the local Nord legends. A Khajiit thief like me, he looks at untended estates like this and only sees promised valuables, free for the taking. In fact, the ghost stories, they only sweetened the pot. Superstitious Nords, they seldom guard what they fear. And so before long, the silhouette of the manor emerged from the gloom. That had to be it. A 2-story husk of stone and timber birched on a rare patch of dry ground, like a tombstone sticking out of the sea of mud. The windows were shuttered and dark. Part of the roof had caved in, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. A rickety wooden fence had encircled the property, its front gate now sagging open, almost welcoming any visitor who dared go inside. The whole place had this air of rot and abandonment, and as I approached, I couldn't help admit but a chill crawling up my spine. But more importantly, greed overruled my caution. I slipped through the gate and crept across the yard, keeping to the shadows. At the main door I paused to listen. There was nothing. No voices, no footsteps, and a Khajiit ear will always hear those things. The only thing that I could hear, though, was the swamp's muffled croaks and chirps behind me. The door was locked, but this old rusty lock was child's play. My pick did the jobs in seconds with a soft click. I eased the door open and slid inside. My heart was pounding, but I was exhilarated. In that moment, I was certain that my gamble had paid off. But how wrong I was. Inside, the manor was deathly silent. My lantern's glow revealed dust dancing in the stale air, peeling wallpaper, and furniture draped in cobwebs. I prowled carefully from room to room, ears perked for any sign of life. But all I found were the ruins of a home long unused, or so it seemed at first. Up a creaking stairway I went, hoping to find a bedchamber with hidden jewels. At the top of the steps, my nose caught a sharp scent that did not belong. It was blood. My fur bristled. In a small study, I found the source. A silver goblet on the floor. Its contents dried and coagulated to a dark stain. I nudged it with my toe and felt dread coiling in my gut. This was no goblet of some ghost. The stories were wrong. Something far worse than a ghost dwelled here. I realized it a second too late. A hissing voice spoke from the shadows behind me. Warm blood and a thief. I whirled, but a blur slammed into me with inhumane speed. I was thrown against a bookcase so hard that pain shot down my spine and stars burst across my vision. In an instant, a tall, gaunt figure seized me by the throat and pinned me to the wall. Crimson eyes burned into mine, fangs glinted. I was in the clutches of a vampire. A Volkihar, no doubt. One of those ancient demons that haunt Skyrim's darkest reaches. And into those dark reaches, I suddenly found myself trapped. He snarled like an animal, a beast from oblivion itself, tightening its grip until I could barely breathe. You shouldn't have come here, little cat. He growled, voice dripping with menace, and I could smell that fresh blood on his breath. My heart thudded in my ears. I was sure I only had seconds to live. Desperately, I rasped out, "Wait, spare me. I can help you." His grip loosened just a fraction. He regarded me with a cold curiosity, as if deciding whether my plea was worth entertaining. "What could you possibly offer me, thief? You damned cat." My brain was racing. I babbled out the words. "If there's something you want, something you can't retrieve yourself, I'll get it. Perhaps there's something hidden down below. Old manors often have secret crypts and catacombs. I could go where you cannot." I had no idea whether that was true, but it was the only gamble I had. Either way, I had to say something. The vampire's blazing red eyes began to narrow, and an uneasy silence hung between us as he weighed my words. Finally, he bared a thin smile. "As it just so happens, there is a relic deep beneath this house, a small, jeweled urn entombed with the family that built this estate. I desire it, but the catacombs are inconvenient for me." I wondered then fleetingly why he hadn't fetched it himself, if he wanted it so badly, but I dared not ask. He slowly released his hold on my neck. I breathed, trembling. "Bring me this urn, little Khajiit, and I will let you live. Fail, or try to flee, well..." He didn't finish the threat. He only smiled wider to show that he didn't need to. I nodded vigorously, scarcely believing my luck. A mission underground. Well, that was better than being bled dry. "Deal," I coughed out. He retrieved my fallen lantern and thrust it back into my hands. With a swirl of his tattered cloak, the vampire herded me through the hall to a door under the stairs. Behind it lay a narrow stairwell descending into a damp stone cellar. In one corner, set into the floor, was a heavy iron gate with a pull ring. The vampire produced an old key from his belt. and with a screech of rusty hinges, lifted the grate to reveal a black shaft and ladder leading down. Clearly, he had no intention of accompanying me below. That even this powerful undead seemed weary of what lurked in his own catacomb, well, it did not steady my nerves. He fixed me with a hard stare. Go, down into the catacomb, fetch the urn, and disturb nothing else. With that, he practically shoved me toward the opening. Clutching the lantern, I climbed down into the darkness, praying to any gods listening that I wasn't making a very fatal mistake. Down into the catacombs. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of mold and old death. I found myself in a narrow stone passage, lined with niches holding crumbling skeletons wrapped in the mildewed linen. Ancient, gnawed catacombs, just as I had guessed. My lantern's light danced on walls carved with faded runes and serpentine motifs. I crept forward, daggers drawn, keenly aware that gnawed tombs often hold unpleasant surprises. Traps, undead guardians. Who knows? Maybe something even worse. I didn't want to find out. The only sounds were my own breathing and the distant drip of water. At least the dead around me would stay dead. Fingers crossed. In fact, at one point, a loose skull toppled from a niche and nearly made me leap out of my fur. But it was merely gravity, and a little bit of decay at work. After winding through a maze of dank corridors, I came upon an ornate iron door engraved with the image of a woman holding an urn. It stood slightly ajar. My tail swished with anticipation. This has to be it. The matriarch's crypt. I slipped through the gap. Inside was a domed burial chamber. In its center, atop a stone altar, sat a golden urn studded with red and purple gems. Even in that darkness, it gleamed with a tempting luster. And there it was, the prize. I approached it reverently and lifted the urn in my hands. Lighter than I expected, but intricate and beautiful. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself a grin. Maybe this would be easy after all. But it rarely is. That was the moment when a thunderous boom nearly stopped my heart. The iron door behind me swung shut with a deafening slam, snuffing out my lantern and trapping me in excess darkness. I almost dropped the urn, fumbling to clutch it against my chest. Panically, I felt my way back to the door, but there was no handle on the inside. And that's when I realized I was sealed in. Stay calm. Stay calm, I whispered to myself, though my voice quavered and shook. My eyes adjusted slowly. Khajiit night sight, teasing out faint shapes. The exit was shut, but I scanned the chamber and noticed another passage. A narrow doorway, tucked behind a pillar, partly obscured by hanging roots. I set the urn down in a dark corner, safely out of the way, and drew my blades. If there was a way out, I needed to find it. I crept toward that doorway. A foul draft wafted from beyond, carrying a stench of rot that made my nose wrinkle. At the threshold, my foot crunched on something, a shattered wooden plank. I knelt and found more pieces littering the floor, painted with crude red runes. It looked like a makeshift barrier had been broken apart from the inside. A low hiss resonated from the deeper in the alcove. My ears flattened, and my blood began to run cold. This side chamber wasn't empty at all. It was a prison, and I had just opened it. Two pale, luminescent eyes blinked in the darkness ahead, accompanied by the scrape of claws on stone. From the blackness emerged a gaunt form, moving on all fours, then rising to a hunched stance. I stumbled back, heart hammering against my ribs. It was an abomination. A man-shaped abomination. Skin shriveled and stretched tight over its bones. Its clothes hung in rotted tatters, and wisps of white hair clung to a blotchy scalp. And when it drew its wheezing breath, I saw the fangs amongst its cracked teeth. I knew what it was. A feral vampire thrall. By the divines, what nightmare had I unleashed? With a shriek, the thrall lunged. I threw myself aside, and its clawed hand smashed into the stone doorway with a force that would have crushed my skull if it had made contact. I scrambled into the crypt as the creature whirled to face me, eyes burning with mindless hunger. There was no way out, and no reasoning with this thing. My only choice was to fight it. I bared my teeth and met the monster with steel. My first slash cut across its chest, opening dry, leathery flesh that scarcely bled. The thrall didn't even flinch. It swiped back with astonishing speed. I parried with one dagger, but the blow knocked me off balance and sent my second blade skittering across the floor. The creature was on me in an instant. Too close, all reeking, clawing fury. I slashed desperately with my remaining dagger to keep those talons from my throat. "Get back," I snarled, half in terror, half in defiance. We circled the chamber in a deadly dance of predator and prey. Though which of us was which had begun to blur. The thrall's next charge barreled into me, and together we crashed through the doorway back into the urn chamber. I hit the ground hard, amidst scattered bones and debris. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs and my dagger from my grasp. The feral vampire loomed over me, saliva dripping from its slack jaws. I kicked its knobby knee, scrambling backward, and it lunged, claws raking my left forearm. I hissed in pain, and I sensed the hot blood oozing through my fur. I was in trouble. Before the thrall could finish me, a bolt of crackling lightning burst from the darkness and struck it square in the side. The chamber lit up in a flash of blue, and the thrall was flung off me with a bone-rattling screech. The smell of scorched flesh filled the air. I rolled onto my stomach in time to see the elder vampire, my captor, now standing in the open doorway, eyes blazing on one hand and outstretched from casting the spell. He had come, drawn by that great commotion. Without hesitation, he hurled another blast. Shards of ice and spears of frost coalesced and smashed it into the thrall as it struggled to get its footing. The feral creature howled as jagged icicles tore through its body. But it still did not fall. With uncanny ferocity, it bounded through the barrage and crashed into its master. Both went down in a tangle of clawing limbs. For a heartbeat, I lay stunned by the sight. The ancient vampire and his crazed thrall rolling across the floor, snarling together like wild animals. It would have been wise to slip away in that moment, but if the thrall prevailed, I'd be right back in its sights. Whether I liked it or not, I needed the old vampire as much as he needed me. Steeling myself, I snatched a flask of lantern oil from my belt. My hands shook, but I managed to pop the cork. All right, time to even the odds. And with that, I darted forward and hurled the flask at the thrall. It shattered across the creature's back, dousing it in oil. In the same breath, I snatched a smoldering piece of debris. The lightning strike had ignited a bit of straw by the wall, and flung it onto the oil-soaked monster. Flames erupted over the thrall's withered frame. It let out an unearthly shriek and staggered off the vampire, frantically battling at the fire now consuming it. The chamber lit up, filled with flickering orange light and the stench of burning flesh. The elder vampire, he did not miss his chance. With a snarl, he conjured a glowing spectral sword into his hand and swung in a wild arc. The blade sliced cleanly through the thrall's neck, sending its charred head rolling across the floor. The headless corpse collapsed in a heap of embers. And just like that, the battle was over. The only sounds were my ragged breathing and the crackling of dying flame. The ancient vampire stood over the smoldering remains of his foe, shoulders heaving from exertion. I sagged against the altar, my chest heaving and every muscle trembling with adrenaline. Defiance. We survived. In all my years, and we Khajiit like to say we have 9 lives, I never imagined I'd spend one of them fighting side by side with a vampire. The vampire dispelled his conjured sword with a flicker of light, and as it was gone, he turned to face me. Those red eyes appraised me up and down. I was battered, bleeding, and the entire room smelled like singed fur. He was scorched and bloodied himself, a gash across his cheek already knitting closed with his fine cloths in tatters. For a moment, we just stared at each other in the gloom, 2 weary survivors, emerging from a nightmare. At last, he inclined his head ever so slightly. "You've done well, Khajiit." There was a new tone in his voice, something almost like a respect. "Your bravery and creativity have not gone unnoticed. I am a man of my word. So go. You're free." My knees nearly buckled with relief. I stood shakily, pressing a hand to the claw wound on my arm. "Thank you," I panted. I meant it sincerely. In that moment, despite all my earlier fear, I felt a strange camaraderie with this creature. We'd fought side by side and seen each other at our worst. In another world, we might have even called it a draw. He strode past me to where the precious urn had rolled against a corner. Stooping, he picked it up and cradled it under one arm. I glimpsed something like melancholy in his face as his fingers traced the urn's jeweled rim. For an instant, I almost felt an ounce of pity. There was a kind of loss in his eyes, a pain that even centuries of unlife had not dimmed. Whatever memories that urn held for him, they ran deep. A pale hint of light was creeping down the stairwell from above. Dawn, fast approaching. The vampire hissed softly as a stray beam brushed his hand, and he recoiled back into the shadow. "Begone now, thief," he muttered. "Linger here at sunrise, and I may yet change my mind." I needed no further encouragement. I turned and limped out of that crypt as fast as my legs allowed, back through the musty corridors and up the ladder to the citadel. By the time I reached the ruined kitchen of the manor, grey morning light was seeping through the cracked boards of the windows. But the vampire did not follow. Before I slipped out the door, I made sure to snatch a little prize of my own. A silver and ruby brooch I'd spotted on a dusty side table. Call it payment for services rendered. I pocketed the trinket with a faint smirk. Old habits die hard. And then out I went, stepping into the dawn. The cool air outside was like a blessing from Kinnereth. Pale mist clung to the marsh, glowing in that early light. I skirted the property and sloshed back toward the road, each breath of fresh air tasting sweeter than the last, the sky painted with bands of pink and gold as the sun crept over that horizon. And behind me, Frosthaven Manor, as I later learned it was called, loomed silently in that fog, its nightmares once again left behind, sealed within those walls. I kept off the main road, avoiding any unwelcome attention. Truth be told, I had no intention of explaining to the Jarl or anyone else what had happened out there. Who would believe me anyway? And what good would it do? It's better to let that marsh keep its dark secrets. So I slipped quietly into Morthal as the town stirred from its slumber. No guard or villager stopped me, just a curious fox that watched from the reeds as a drenched, soot-streaked Khajiit limped by with a look of utter exhaustion and a hint of triumph. And now, here we sit, safe and sound, with daylight warming our backs as I finish my tale over a much-needed drink. You're looking at me like I've been sampling skooma, but I swear, on the moons, that every word that I've told you is true. Close your mouth now. You'll let the flies in. I have the scars to prove it. Here, look at this brooch. I fish that silver and ruby ornament from my pocket and toss it across the table with a grin. It's proof that I walked into a vampire's lair and lived to tell the tale. Sure, it's a story few will believe. I know that. That's why I don't tell it too much. Sometimes I scarcely believe it myself. But there is one thing for certain. I'll think twice before sneaking into any more abandoned estates without an invitation. The deadliest trap in that manor, it wasn't a spike bit or a poisoned dart. It was the uninvited guest who called it home. And so I raise my tankard and salute the morning sun. To dead vampires and live Khajiit. I've earned this peace and quiet. Indeed, after a night like that, even a thief has to appreciate the simple joy of just being alive. And not to mention the taste of good ale at dawn. Get some rest now, my friend. That's enough for one night. You're so damn persistent, aren't you? I wasn't planning on telling anyone what happened out in the marsh that night. You just had to keep prodding. Fine, I'll spill it. But just keep it to yourself. I don't want it making the rounds in the taverns. I suppose it's not like anyone would believe it anyway. Starts off just like any other job. Delvin sliding a scrap of paper my way in the back corner of the flagon. Special request, he muttered, eyes glinting under the hood of his cloak. Even in that dim candlelight, I could see a writ detailed a target near Riften. Some crew of smugglers had made off with a valuable item. My task: slip in, liberate the item, and get out clean. Pretty standard burglary. At least, on paper. I should have known from the way Delvin avoided meeting my eyes that there was a little bit more to it. He usually cracks a wry joke while giving me the job details, but this time he was all business. "So, Delvin, what's the catch?" I asked, tracing a finger over the parchment. "There's always a catch." "Client secretive," Delvin shrugged, lowering his voice. "Pays extremely well for this idol to be returned. Doesn't want the city guard involved." He paused and then added, "He also said to warn you, it's Daedric." Ugh, Daedric. Just the word sent a chill down my spine. As a rule, I don't fancy dealing with anything touched by the Princes of Oblivion. Too many horror stories. Cursed rings. Mad kings. But then again, coin is coin. And the Thieves Guild reputation was riding on satisfying this anonymous client. It was no time to be turning away business. I could almost feel Mercer's glare from across the room, though he wasn't actually there. He'd been scarce lately on guild business. Still, failing wasn't an option if I wanted to keep my standing. So I smirked like I wasn't fazed. An idol, is it? Well, Daedric or not, it'll be in our vault by morning, I guarantee it. Bravado had always been a friend to me, even when common sense screamed otherwise. Delvin gave a tight nod. Perhaps he knew it was all for show, too. Then he returned to nursing his Flynn, leaving me to prepare. By dusk, I was geared up and moving. I left Riften through a hidden grate behind the docks, slipping into the wild underbelly of the rift. The city lights dwindled behind me as I crept along deer paths and game trails, guided only by moonlight and memory. I knew the general area the smugglers were camped in, somewhere in the marshes just north of Lake Honrick's eastern tip, where the land turns to suckling mud and fetid ponds. Not the most comfortable place for a midnight stroll, that's for sure. The further I got from Riften, the quieter the world became. No city watch, no rambling drunks, just the chirr of crickets and the occasional hoot of a night owl. Under the canopy of gnarled trees, the air hung damp and cold. Patches of mist clung to the ground like pale shrouds. Each step sank my boots into black mud that tried to hold on and take them, making a soft, wet suction as I pulled them free. I moved carefully, keeping my footsteps as silent as possible. I skirted a stagnant pool where a ghostly blue nernroot glimmered at the water's edge, its chiming hum the only sign of life. A wilting death bell nearly looked like a warning to turn back, but I just gripped my dagger and pressed onward. After about an hour of trudging through half-submerged reeds and threading between twisted, half-dead trees, I spotted a faint orange glow bobbing through the fog ahead. It was the light of a fire, unmistakable. I crouched behind the mossy trunk of a fallen pine and peered through the cattails. Sure enough, a camp sprawled on a dry patch of ground rising above the muck, maybe 100 paces off. I could make out the silhouettes of 4 tents and the dark shapes of crates piled up haphazardly. A flickering bonfire crackled at the center, sending sparks spiraling up to challenge the starlight. The smugglers were still awake, but not exactly on high alert. I spied one of them, a red-guard man by the looks of his outline, staggering from the fire toward the tent, a bottle in hand. Skooma or ale, I couldn't tell. But either way, they were indulging in their spoils, celebrating early. Idiots. Two more figures lingered near the bonfire. One was hunched over a crate, fiddling with something, likely examining a piece of the loot by firelight. The other was a burly Nord leaning on a tree, his laughter booming across the camp at some unheard joke. Even from my hiding spot, I could detect the smell of sweat, the pungent tang of skooma. They were definitely in their cups and pipes, that's for sure. Good. That just makes the job a whole lot easier. Drunken thieves. They're easier to sneak past. Usually with a crew like this, they'd post at least one sentry on watch, especially after making off with the valuable contraband. But as I circled slowly around the camp's perimeter to get a better view, I realized I hadn't seen a single lookout. Overconfidence. Or just stupidity. Either way, I wasn't going to complain. I crept from shadow to shadow, inching closer to the largest tent. There I spotted an ornate golden chest on the ground with its lid thrown open and its interior empty, likely where they'd kept the idol. Not a good sign. If they'd taken the idol out to admire it, it could be anywhere in the camp now. Just as I was considering my approach, perhaps a lob a stone to draw the pair by the fire away and then slip into the big tent, there was a blood-curdling scream that ripped through the night. I froze. The scream came from somewhere on the far side of the camp, beyond the tents. It was a man, shrill and panicked, the kind of sound that makes your skin prickle and your gut turn to knots. The camp fell silent, aside from the crackle of the fire. The two by the bonfire jolted upright. The red guard who had just stumbled into his tent came rushing back out, nearly tripping over the threshold. "What in oblivion was that?" one of them shouted. I used the chaos to slide a few steps closer, ducking behind an overturned rowboat that must have been dragged here for seating. My heart thudded, not from fear of being seen, but from the raw terror in that scream. It hadn't sounded like someone being attacked. No, it was a pure, unhinged fear. Voices in the camp tangled themselves up in confusion. Through the gloom, I saw a fourth smuggler emerge from a small pup tent, buckling on a sword belt. "Where's Ingvar? He was on watch," the Nord leader barked, snatching a torch from the fire. So there had been a sentry after all, and if that scream was Ingvar, something had gone very, very wrong. The Nord and one of the others, a Bosmer woman by her slight stature, began moving toward the end of the camp, where the scream had come from. The Nord held the torch high, his other hand gripping a sword, while the Bosmer followed with an arrow nocked to the bowstring. The remaining two, the Red Guard and a stocky Imperial, hovered near the bonfire, weapons drawn, but looking uncertain which way to go. I pressed myself against the hull of the old boat as the Nord and Bosmer just passed a dozen paces from me. The torch cast wild shadows on the trees. I held my breath, thankful for the fog that cloaked me. For a few heartbeats, the only sounds were their heavy breaths and the distant squish of the Nord's boots in the mud. But then a new noise reached us. Faint, muffled and sobbing. It was coming from the darkness, where the two were headed. The Nord called out, voice wavering slightly, Ingvar, is that you? No response, just that sobbing and a wet choke. I inched around the boat to keep them in sight. The torchlight bobbed and then stopped. I could just make out the Nord's broad back as he stood at the base of the dead tree. Divines, Ingvar, what happened to you? I heard him say, horror in his tone. The Bosma edged beside him, bow still raised. Suddenly, the night erupted into chaos. A second scream. This time the Nords split the air, only to be cut short with a sickening gurgle. The torch dropped to the ground, its flame illuminating a spray of blood across the fog. The Bosma cried out in surprise, releasing an arrow blindly into the darkness. Ambush! We're under attack! The Imperial by the fire shouted, panic rising in his voice. The Redguard cursed and stumbled backwards, away from the dark tree line. From my vantage by the boat, I had a partial view of the carnage beyond. In the sputtering torch glow, I saw the Nord leader collapse, his throat slashed open by nothing. There was no attacker visible. Ingvar, the missing sentry, was on his knees nearby, but, well, he wasn't fighting anyone. He was clawing at his own face, wailing in terror. There was no sign of any assailant, mortal or beast. No arrows in the Nord, no sneaking bandits that I could see. The Bosma woman was circling frantically, trying to cover every direction with her bow. Ingvar just kept wailing, no more, no more, and tearing at his hair. She stepped towards Ingvar, confusion and fear written in her stance. Ingvar, snap out of it! What's attacking us? She shouted. In response, Ingvar suddenly lunged at her. He tackled the Bosma to the ground with a crazed howl. They disappeared behind a clump of ferns, but I heard her bow clatter, and her scream turn into a choking gasp. My mouth was as dry as tundra sand. This wasn't an ambush. At least, not by any mortal band of cutthroats. Something else. Yes, it was toying with these people, driving them all mad. And I had a sick feeling that I knew what it was. The idol. A cursed Daedric idol in their hall. That was my job to retrieve. Delvin's warning about it being Daedric, that wasn't just a bit of caution. It was the key to this whole nightmare. While those idiots drank and laughed around it, the artifact had probably been working its evil on them, slowly tipping them into madness. Now it was happening fast, and perhaps irreversible. It was risky, but I saw an opening. The Bosma and the Nord were down. The only ones left were the Redguard and the Imperial by the fire, and they were utterly spooked. If I moved quickly and quietly, I could snatch the idol amid the confusion, and be gone before they even realized somebody else was there. I darted from the boat to a low stack of sacks, moon sugar or salt or whatever illicit goods they'd been hauling. My eyes scanned the camp. The ornate chest I'd noted earlier was still outside the big tent, lid ajar and empty. Where was the idol itself? My gaze flickered to the bonfire and the crates around it. There, on a small crate right beside the fire pit, an object glinted gold and black. A statue, about a foot tall, its dark surface catching the firelight. That's it. That has to be it. The Redguard had regained his footing and was inching back toward the fire, eyes darting around wildly. The Imperial had run toward where the torch fell and was now hovering near the edges of darkness, sword drawn but trembling. The Redguard nearly backed into the crate with the idol on it. He turned, finally noticing the strange statue by his elbow. I saw him stare at it, momentarily forgetting the chaos around him. "What in Stendar's name?" he muttered, reaching out. The statue depicted a hooded female figure clutching an hourglass, carved of some black metal. The sand within the hourglass hung suspended, as if time itself were frozen. Even from where I crouched, I felt a queasy unease looking at it, as if the idol somehow looking back. And oh, it happened so fast that the Redguard's face slackened, his eyes glazing over as if he lifted the idol. A low chuckle bubbled from his throat, then threw into hysterical laughter. He held the idol up, giggling like it whispered the funniest joke in Tamriel into its ear. The sound raised every hair on my body. Now, I had to act now while he was distracted. Still crouched in shadow, I slipped a small throwing knife from my boot, weighing whether to risk a toss or to take him down silently. But before I could decide, the Redguard suddenly screamed, "Take it back! Take it back!" and with a wild swing of his arm, hurled the idol into the darkness beyond the camp. The fool threw it away. I bit back a curse and ducked lower on instinct. My eyes tracked the idol's silhouette as it spun end over end and vanished into the swamp with a distant splash. That changed things. My precious cargo was now laying somewhere out in the bog. At least it was away from these lunatics for the moment, but now I had to fetch it out of the mud while two crazed smugglers were still on the loose. So much for an easy snatch and go. At least, the Redguard was free of the artifact's grip now. In fact, the moment it left its hand, he staggered, as if waking up from a nightmare. He blinked in confusion, taking in the scene. The Nord, dead by the torch. Ingvar and the Bosmer collapsed in the reeds. He began to shake uncontrollably. The Imperial by the trees was still shouting for the others, only to turn and finally notice the Redguard's outburst. "Jareth, what are you doing?" he yelled, clearly having no idea what insanity had just possessed his friend. The Redguard, Jareth, I guess, looked at his empty hands and then toward the others. I saw the realization hit him that he might have been the one to throw the idol. Fear, guilt, and panic twisted his face. He gave one last panicked glance into the dark swamp where the idol had gone, and then turned and ran. Not deeper into the marsh, but back, past the bonfire, as if he intended to flee into the night and leave this cursed place behind. Oh, no, you don't. If he escaped, he might alert the authorities or return with reinforcements, neither of which I wanted. And I still had to get that idol without looking over my shoulder for a vengeful smuggler. He sprinted past my hiding spot, boots slipping in the mud. In a fluid motion, I rose and sprang at him from behind. One hand clamped hard over his mouth before he could scream. My dagger drove up under his ribs. He buckled in my grip, a muffled cry lost against my palm. I gritted my teeth and twisted the blade. In moments, the fight drained out of him, and he sagged to the ground. Killing up close. It never gets easier. But it was him or me. I eased the Redguard's lifeless body down and yanked my dagger free. The Imperial must have been too far or too distracted to hear the scuffle. I saw no sign of him rushing back yet. Either he was tending to Ingvar, or he was fleeing as well. Quickly, I wiped my blade on the Redguard's tunic and slid it away. My eyes went to the tree line where the idol had vanished. Somewhere out there in the mire lay a very dangerous bit of merchandise, still exerting its influence perhaps. But I needed to secure it, fast, before it claimed any more victims, or before it could work its magic on me. Steeling myself, I ventured toward the dark swamp beyond the camp's edge where the idol had flown. Past the ring of tents, the ground sloped downward into a murky fen. The fog was thicker here, and an unnatural silence had fallen. Not a cricket chirp, not a frog croak, as if every living creature with a lick of sense had already fled. I whispered a quick plea to Nocturnal under my breath. Luck for the shadows, as I retrieved a small lantern from my pack and struck it a light. The orange glow was feeble in the mist, but it was better than groping blind. "All right, cursed idol," I mumbled to myself. "Where did you land?" I moved slowly, lantern held aloft in one hand, an empty burlap sack ready in the other to wrap the artifact. Each footstep sank into the cold mud or shallow pools, the swamp eager to swallow anything that lingered. A few times I nearly lost my footing on submerged roots or stones. Once my boot plunged into a hidden sinkhole with a loud squelch, submerging my leg up to the knee in putrid water. Oh, I grimaced at the stench, like rot and sulfur all mixed in. I hauled myself out, shivering as I pressed on. I lifted the lantern high and resumed my search. The fog played tricks on my eyes, every gnarled root or twisted branch appearing as a looming figure until I drew close. Easier said than done to keep calm. Soon the shadows weren't just shadows. I spotted a shape a few yards to my right and swung the lantern toward it, heart lurching. It was a young woman, drenched and pale, her dark hair hanging limp over her face. She stood waist deep in a stagnant pool. I almost called out, what foolish girl would be out here? But something kept me quiet. She wasn't moving, not reacting to the light, and her eyes, when I squinted to see, glowed faintly. I took a cautious step closer, raising the lantern. My free hand went to the hilt of my dagger. "Hello?" I whispered. The woman slowly lifted her head. Through the curtain of tangled hair, I glimpsed a deathly grin, far too wide across her cheeks. But I blinked, and she was gone. Just like that, the figure had vanished, leaving only ripples in the black water where she once stood. I exhaled a shaky curse. This was Vermina's doing. Only the Prince of Nightmares could conjure such horrors. This idol was whirring into my mind, just as it had with the smugglers. I forced myself to focus on what was real, the steady glow of the lantern, the solid weight of the dagger in my hand, the sound of the mud beneath my boots. I wasn't going to let a damn illusion break me. And so I pushed forward, and at last, my lantern light glinted off something metallic amid a clump of mireweed. There, half sunk into a muddy pool, was the idol. I carefully parted the reeds to be sure. The small statue lay on its side in the muck, a robed woman cast in black metal, clutching an hourglass. The glass gleamed, and trapped sand within shimmered unnaturally, as if it was aware of my presence. A chill emanated from it, that I could feel even though through the swamp's cold an aura of pure malevolence. My instincts screamed at me not to touch it with bare skin. Using the burlap sap like gloves, I gingerly lifted the idol out of the mud. The instant I did, a wave of dizziness hit me. The mist swirled, and for a heartbeat, the world itself seemed to tilt. I nearly toppled before catching myself on a tree root. A cacophony of whispers grazed my ears, but then they faded as quickly as they came. I steadied, shoving the idol quickly into the burlap. I cinched the sack tight, wrapping the cloth around the idol several times. At least it was out of sight. Some of the pressure behind my eyes eased the moment it was covered. Clutching the wrapped idol, I snatched up the chest lid I'd bought and turned back toward the camp. The bonfire was dying, just a faint orange glow in that deep fog, but it was enough to orient me. I needed to seal this thing in its chest and get out. As I neared the perimeter of the camp, I heard movement. I doused my lantern quickly and crouched, heart thudding. Had one of them survived and recovered their senses? Or worse, was somebody else here? I crept closer, keeping low. As I neared the dying firelight, I spotted movement by one of the tents. It was the Bosma woman. She was somehow still alive, crawling weakly through the mud. Blood covered her neck and chest from a vicious wound in her throat, and each breath came in a wet, choking gasp. I approached her cautiously, hidden blade drawn but lowered. For all she knew, I was just another nightmare coming out of the fog. Up close, she was in a bad way. Pale as a ghost, eyes glassed over with shock, hands slick with her own blood as she tried in vain to staunch the wound. I knelt at her side and gently took her hand. She tried to speak, blood bubbling on her lips, and a faint word escaped. "Help." I whispered back, "I'm sorry." I didn't know what else to do. Her eyes suddenly widened at some unseen horror, and she began to shake. A final fit of terror racked her body, and then she fell limp, life fading. I laid her hand across her chest and whispered a quiet farewell before I stood. I staggered to the large chest by the tent and stuffed the wrapped idol back into it. The lock was broken, so I wound some spare rope around the lid to hold it shut. It was a flimsy seal, but at least the idol was contained and out of sight. Then I hefted the chest under my arm, surprised at how heavy the damn thing felt. Maybe it was just my exhaustion. I seemed to carry the weight of all of those nightmares inside. The marsh didn't want to let me go quietly. On the slog back, I heard eerie whispers, and even a child's laughter echoing in the fog. In the corner of my eye, distorted shapes flitted among the twisted trees. Once, I even heard heavy footsteps sloshing behind me. I spun around with my lantern raised, but nothing was there. Only silence and swirling mist. I refused to stop or look again, clutching the chest and focusing on the path ahead. I pressed on until those nightmare sounds faded and the ground finally grew firm beneath my boots. After what felt like an eternity, the stony silhouettes of Riften's walls finally came into view through the dawn haze. I slipped back into the city via the docks, unseen by the groggy guards, and headed straight for the flagon's secret entrance beneath the old cistern. I stumbled into the flagon, dripping swamp water and deathly exhausted. A few guildmates gaped as I dropped the mud-caked jest onto the table and slumped into a chair. Delvin hurried over with a weary look and managed a tired smirk. "It's done," I rasped. "The idol's in the chest, and before you ask, yes, it's as cursed as they come." I gave him a brief rundown of what happened, how the smugglers fell to the idol's influence and tore at each other. His face tightened, but he nodded. Delvin, he wasn't one to be too easily surprised, but even his jaw dropped. "The client's coming for it today," Delvin muttered, eyeing the sealed chest. He slid a fat coin pouch my way. "You earned this, and then some." I accepted with a shaky hand. "Don't worry, we won't be opening it," he added. "Go and get some rest." I didn't need to be told twice to do that. Let the secretive client handle this curse thing from here on. I'd done my part. I left Delvin to lock the idol away and dragged myself off to wash up and collapse into bed. And so there it is. Now you know why I look like death warmed over today. The cursed cargo is off my hands, the pace in my pocket, and the nightmares, well, I suppose they might stick around for a while. Truth be told, gold feels a bit lighter after a job like that. I can't shake the image of those poor fools tearing each other apart, or those horrors I saw in the swamp. But in the line of a thief's work, you've learned to swallow your fear or choke on it. I've had my fill of Daedric artifacts. If I never see another, it'll be too soon. Anyway, keep the tale between us, all right? I don't need any of the other new members of the guild or the old ones thinking I've gone soft by going over these memories with you. Actually, I think you owe me the next round. Nocturnal knows that I've earned it. Not every night ends with a thief walking out of a nightmare, just alive enough to tell the tale, albeit in a very hushed voice. Gather close, my friend, and listen. I begin, my voice low as the tavern's hearth crackles with comforting fire. Shadows dance on the wooden walls. The scent of burning pine mingles in with the bitter aroma of ale. You lean in from across the table, nursing that drink of yours, eyes reflecting the flame. I can see your curiosity. After all, I suppose I did promise to tell you of one of my darkest trials. A tale of vanished faithful and hidden horror in the misty marsh of Hjalmarch. I remember it vividly, as if the marsh's chill still clings to my bones. Back in those days, I was a vigilant of Stendar, a wandering paladin, sworn to root out the unholy, those filthy Daedra, all creatures of darkness that prey on the mortal people. My life was dedicated to Stendar's light, and to the protection of the innocent. Mercy to the innocent, judgment for the wicked. That was the creed that I carried in my heart. And so when whispers reached the Order of a strange menace in the town of Morthal, without hesitation I volunteered. The rumors spoke of worshippers disappearing from the chapel in the dead of night, faithful souls vanishing without a trace. People were talking. Some said the divines had abandoned that swampy corner of Skyrim. Others whispered of curses, or even witches in the midst. but I suspected something worse. I had a feeling, the kind of evil that wears a friendly face, but bares its teeth when you least expect it. Morthal, a dreary, remote town, crouched on the edge of a miserable and endless marsh. I arrived at dusk. As pale sun bled out behind the clouds, and a veil of fog crept from the stagnant waters. The dirt path into the town was slick with mud, and each step I took seemed to echo in the uncanny silence. No laughter of children, no chattering from doorsteps, only the croak of distant frogs and the whisper of a wind through those half-dead branches. The air is thick with peat and decay. The oppressive damp that sank into my cloak. I couldn't take it. I pulled it tighter, uttering a quiet prayer. Stendar, grant me your warmth and vigilance. My breath misted before me, an involuntary shiver ran through my spine, and that had little to do with the cold. As I passed through the first hovels at the town's edge, weary eyes peered from shuttered windows. The people of Morthal were no strangers to hardship. They'd been through a lot. The Jarl, Igrod Ravencrone, was said to be a wise woman who communed with spirits and visions. Perhaps she'd foreseen my coming. Regardless, the common folk recognized a vigilance armor, the silver symbol of Stendar on my gauntlets, the gleam of the blessed mace at my side. But instead of relief, their faces showed fear and hopelessness. They'd seen too much already. I recalled stories only a few years past. A vampire and his brood had nearly made Morthal their feeding ground, until a wandering hero intervened. Morvath. I think that was the fiend's name. A sinister legend, even among my order. But his lair had been burned out and purged. Yet here we are again. Evil is like the marsh water. You bail it out, but it seeps back in, slowly from below. Lantern light beckoned from the town center as I approached. The one inn, Moorside Inn, offered a brief respite and maybe some information. Before diving into my investigation, I needed to understand all I could. Pushing open the door, I was greeted by warm air carrying the scent of stew and a low murmur of voices. A few heads turned, and the din hushed further when they noticed the vigilant symbol upon my chest. I gave a polite nod to the room. I might be a paladin, but a stranger still, and quietly took my seat near the hearth to dry my damp boots. The innkeeper, Jonah, approached with a cautious smile. "Welcome to Moorside, traveler. What brings you to Morthal at this hour?" She likely already guessed. A town this small, news of missing people, and a vigilance arrival. Yeah, they must be connected. I answered softly. "I've come about the disappearances. I'm here to help you." At that, a middle-aged man at the bar barked a humorous laugh. "Help, huh? Stendar's mercy finally extends to us humble swamp folk." His voice carried bitterness. Jonah shot him a warning glare. I stood and faced him, keeping my voice level. Stendar's mercy extends to all who need it. I intend to find whoever or whatever is responsible for your troubles. The man, I later learned, his name was Yorick, a hunter, spat into the fire and muttered, "Yeah, we'll see." The tension was thick, but another voice, raspy with age, broke it from a corner. "You must speak with Brother Thane at the chapel," an old woman croaked. She rocked in her chair by the wall, wrapped in a threadbare shawl. "He's the one who tends the shrine. Poor soul's lost near half his flock in a month." I inclined my head in thanks. That was exactly the plan. I politely asked if anyone could tell me more. The old woman's milky eyes narrowed and she said, "People go to pray, child. They go to pray, but they don't come back. The gods don't answer in Morthal. Or maybe something wicked does instead." A hush fell. Jonah made a protective symbol over her heart, whether to ward off evil or appeal to the divines. Perhaps both, trying her luck. And my jaw tightened. Wicked answers in their place. I had studied enough unnatural lore to suspect what that could mean. Daedra sometimes impersonate gods to trick the faithful. And vampires. Well, vampires often haunt the fringes of society, where folks won't be missed too much. After finishing a bowl of hot stew offered by Jonah, and trading a few more whispered questions with the patrons, I left the inn. Night had settled, the fog thicker than before. Only a few of the flickering torches lit the muddy paths. I navigated towards the chapel, guided by a wooden sign marked with the symbol of Arche, a skull in a circle, pointing down a side lane. Arche, the divine birth and death, was reversed in this remote place. His priests tend the dead and comfort the bereaved. It made sense. Where better for a coven of undead to hide than beneath the temple of the god who loathes undeath? The thought unsettled me. I quickened my pace. At the very edge of town stood the chapel of Morthal, where the last dry ground met the mire. It was a modest structure of timber with a small steeple. Its shingled roof was blanketed in moss and the walls bore dark streaks of years of damp. Yet the stained glass window above the entrance glimmered with Arche's symbol, and I took heart from that sign of faith shining against the gloom. I found Brother Thane inside, on his knees before the altar, a portly, balding man with kind but bloodshot eyes, clearly exhausted and distraught. At the sound of my footfalls on the wooden floors he arose, wiping his eyes hastily. "Stendarr bless you for coming," he whispered, recognizing my attire at once. The chapel's interior was simple, a few rough pews, candles flickering along the walls, and an altar draped in a faded cloth. A sweet haze of incense hung in the air, not quite masking an underlying coppery tang. You know the one, the faint smell of blood. My senses sharpened. A vigilant learns to notice these things. They're not there for no reason. And after a gentle greeting, Brother Thane poured out his woes. In a hushed, trembling tone, he recounted how over the past month, one by one, members of his small congregation vanished. First it was old Jofthor, who came for evening prayers and never returned. Thane said, voice quavering. Then Hagar, a young mother, and 2 nights past we lost Alva, one of our chapel maidens as well. His eyes brimmed with tears. At the mention of Alva, I recalled that name from the tales of Morthal's past. A woman enthralled by Movarth, years and years ago. Could it be the same Alva, fallen victim again, or just a cruel coincidence of name? Brother Thane continued, wringing his hands. We searched everywhere, vigilant. The marsh, the woods, every hut, every hollow. It's as if they were swallowed by the fog. No tracks, no cries for help, nothing. He looked at me desperately. At first I thought perhaps wolves or a marsh troll might be dragging people away, but there'd be signs of that. I finished the thought for him. Blood. Bodies. I know. He nodded. But there was none. Only Arke's silence. He lowered his head, guilt and helplessness etched on his features. I placed a gauntleted hand on his shoulder. Take heart, brother. Stendarr has not forsaken you, nor has Arke, for I am here. Sometimes the gods send their servants as answers to our prayers. I infused my voice with confidence and compassion, but in truth, a knot of unease had lodged in my gut. People vanishing without a trace often pointed to an otherworldly cause. I already suspected the hand of a vampire, or worse, a coven of them. Yet I did not want to alarm the priest more than necessary. Brother Thane sniffled and straightened up, grasping at hope. I keep the chapel open each night, in case any of the lost find their way back, or in case I can catch whoever's doing this. He glanced toward the dark corners of the hall. But vigilant. I fear I'm being watched. It's like, well, sometimes I feel eyes on me from the shadows. The candles guttered slightly as he spoke, as if a draught passed through, or something unseen had stirred. My skin prickled under the mail. Instinct whispered that his fears were not unfounded. I drew forth a small silver charm from beneath my cuirass, an amulet of Stendarr, and held it aloft. In a soft chant I invoked a minor ward. The charm glowed, casting a gentle light into the recesses of the chapel. But in that glow, something caught my eye on the wooden floor by the far wall. A tiny splash of crimson. Blood, dried to a single dark drop. Nearby the wall's paneling bore a few subtle gouge marks as if scratched by fingernails, and my heart quickened. Brother Thane, I asked quickly, did you clean the chapel today? He blinked at the question. Yes, just after first light. I do that every morning. Why? I beckoned him over and showed him the evidence, to which his eyes widened in pure terror. The blood speck had definitely not been there at dawn, and that meant that sometime during the day, when the chapel was empty, someone's blood had been spilled. He crossed himself with Arke's sigil and whispered a prayer. What do you suspect? He asked, voice barely audible. I met his gaze. Honesty, that was a risk, but I couldn't leave him ignorant. I suspect a vampire, or even a coven of them, have made this place their hunting ground. It all fits. The disappearances, the lack of traces, the way you feel watched. They could be hiding beneath us, or nearby, using secret paths, possibly an old crypt under the chapel. Thane grew pale, shock and disgust contorting his facial features. Vampires? In Arke's house? No. How could such filth get... He composed himself, resolve hardening. Okay, what must we do? I will not allow these abominations by the divines to defile this holy place, or harm another innocent. I have to admit, I admired his courage. Few unarmed priests would dare stand against the undead. I put my hand on his shoulder. We will stop them, I assured him, but we must be cautious. I need to find their lair, preferably in daylight. That's when they're their weakest. Rushing in now at night, that would play right into their hands. He nodded. The worry still lined his brow. His gaze drifted to a side alcove where a locked chest sat. Brother Thane hurried over and produced a key from his robe. From the chest, he reverently lifted out a large chunk of gleaming silver attached to a cracked wooden haft, a broken warhammer head engraved with divine symbols. He hefted it up with both hands and offered it to me. This is a relic, A fragment of Stendar's hammer, he explained, voice reverent. I've been keeping it here for generations. It was said to crush 1,000 abominations in the hands of a righteous warrior. If vampires defile Arcade's ground, let them face the wrath of Stendar. I ran my fingers over the etched symbols on the relic. Despite its age, it emanated a subtle warmth that seeped into my weary bones. A tingling strength filled my arm. Brother, I am honored, I said quietly. I wrapped it in its cloth and secured the heavy fragment to my belt. The extra weight was a burden I'd gladly bear. With this, we'll make them regret ever coming here. Brother Thane nodded and managed a hopeful smile. Before I departed, I asked if the chapel or graveyard had any hidden crypts or passages. And sure enough, Brother Thane mentioned an old catacomb beneath the chapel where long-dead priests were interred, though it hadn't been used in decades. The entrance was outside, around the back of the chapel, but he rarely went there aside from occasional maintenance. My pulse quickened at that. A likely place for evil to lurk, that's for sure. I told him to keep the chapel doors barred and not invite anyone in until he heard from me again. Even if I knock, test me with a prayer, I said. Vampires can deceive the eye and mind. Trust only the holy words of Stendar. He agreed solemnly. Stepping back out into that foggy night, I took a moment to survey the graveyard behind the chapel. The mist clung to the ground, swirling around the weathered gravestones. Something caught my eye. One of the old tombstones had fresh scratches at its base, and the earth around it was disturbed. Crouching, I brushed aside wet moss and discovered a small cloth bundle hidden in a hollow. Inside were peculiar items: a silver ring bearing a Daedric rune, a few human teeth, and a pinch of dried nightshade. I stiffened as I recognized the rune on that ring, the curved, claw-like symbol of Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of enslavement and vampires. A cultist's token, perhaps, or an old vampire's keepsake. But either way, it was a confirmation that this was no random monster. It was darkness steeped in ancient and unyielding evil. Teeth and nightshade, ingredients for dark rituals, and that ring of Molag Bal. I muttered a curse under my breath and pocketed the ring as evidence. The rest I wrapped back up and replaced, hoping perhaps to catch someone returning for it later. Either way, my course was set. I whispered my fervent vow under the weeping trees of the graveyard. By Stendar's will and Arcade's law, I will cast out this unholy darkness. And with that, I left the chapel grounds and headed back toward the inn, my mind already strategizing how to track and destroy these hidden fangs of the night. Gods, guide my path. The hour was late, past midnight, and I returned to Morthal's dimly lit center. The streets were empty and silent but for the distant croak of frogs in the marsh. But plan or no plan, I couldn't face a coven alone without more information. The Jarl's guards had found nothing. And if a vampire was at work, it would avoid open detection. They're smart, resourceful, as much as they are cunning. I needed insight from someone who knew the shadows of this town. In that line of work, it often meant turning to the local underbelly, those who operate in darkness for their own gain. It's an unsavory route. I don't like taking it, but knowledge is a weapon as keen as any blade, and I would use every tool that Stendar allowed. I entered the moorside inn once more, now nearly deserted. Jonah was wiping down the bar, and one last patron snored softly in a corner. As I made for the stairs to see if any lodgers or riff-raff might be about, a low voice murmured from a shadowy booth. "Looking for someone, vigilant." I turned, hand subtly on my mace, and peered at the speaker. In the dim light I saw a lean, gnawed man in a tattered leather coat, a hood pulled over his sandy hair, scruffy beard framing a roguish smirk. He leaned forward and gestured for me to join. Jonah eyed us with a frown, clearly disapproving. "Don't waste the vigilant's time, Elvin," she scolded at him from across the room. The man gave a dismissive wave. "Just offering a friendly word, Jonah. No harm in conversation, surely." I approached, cautiously. "Elvin, is it?" He nodded theatrically. "Elvin Mosley, at your service. A humble trader in rare goods." He winked. I could smell cheap mead and marsh water on him. "Smuggler, probably. Maybe exactly what I needed." "Listen, Elvin, you know why I'm here. Do you know anything about these disappearances?" He steepled his fingers. "I might. Maybe. Information has value, of course. But I'm a little more civic-minded than you'd think. Let's say I'd like to help my little town here, and maybe you could help me with a little problem of my own." "Of course." I cocked an eyebrow. "Go on, Elvin." Elvin glanced over at Jonah, seeing if she was busy, and then lowered his voice. "Listen, vigilant. The truth is, I move goods through Yarmarch, you see. Off the record. The guards have a small bounty on me for some misunderstanding about taxes, you see. You help me clear that up, and I'll be your personal guide to the less traveled corners of this swamp. I know 'em all. I can see and hear things that the Jarl's men overlook. Ordinarily, I'd loathe to bargain with a lawbreaker, but if he truly had knowledge that could save lives, exceptions would have to be made. If your information helps me save those people and put an end to what's taking them, I'll speak to the Jarl about your bounty, and you'll have some coin for your trouble too. But by the divines, if you lead me astray—" I pointed my fingers, leaving the threat hang. His smirk faltered a bit, and he replied, Hey, I understand, Vigilant. No tricks. I'm part of this town too. I want this evil gone as much as anyone. Let's help each other out, He motioned for me to sit, and I did, albeit on edge, and he began in a conspiratorial tone. 2 nights ago, I was out on the marsh, late, moving some cargo by boat, and that's when I saw it. Over near the chapel's graveyard, a light bobbing in the fog. Naturally, I doused my lantern and drifted closer, quiet as a slaughterfish. His eyes glinted. I saw 2 figures by the crypt entrance behind the chapel. One was carrying something, and I realized it was a person, limp over their shoulder. Gave me a right scare, it did, let me tell you. But I stayed hidden and watched. The second figure moved aside a bunch of brush and opened a hatch in the ground that I never knew was there. They climbed down with the body. I didn't stick around after that. I figured whatever it wasn't good. My pulse quickened. He had described exactly what I'd suspected. So there is a hidden entrance to the catacombs. I knew it. Elvin nodded. Aye. I looked for it by daylight, but damned if I could find it under all the mud and moss. Whoever's using it knows how to cover their tracks. He leaned forward, lowering his voice further. Listen, Vigilant, we've got to move fast. If those people are alive down there, there's no telling what's happening to them. And if they're dead, well, we better bring a few extra stakes, don't you think? He attempted grim humor, but I could see the concern behind his eyes. I agreed the time was critical. My plan had been to wait for dawn, catch the vampires vulnerable. But if captives were in imminent danger, every second mattered. Fine, we'll go now. Quietly and carefully. Show me this route. And Elvin, you have a weapon, right? Bring it. You might need it. Elvin flashed a quick grin and patted a short steel sword at his hip. Of course, Vigilant. I never leave home without it. Outside, the air was clammy and cold. A heavy silence lay over the marsh, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Elvin led me behind the inn to the water's edge, where a narrow skiff was tethered. By water's the quickest, less likely to be noticed too. We stepped in, and he pushed off with the pole. The boat glided over the black water, reeds whispering against the hull. I kept my mace across my lap, eyes scanning in the darkness. A faint glow of faint stars was all that lit our way. The moons hidden behind the clouds. As we drifted, I broke the silence. Why do this, Elvin? If you are what you say you are, a smuggler, why risk your neck for this? I don't understand. I had to know if his motives were trustworthy. He shrugged, not meeting my gaze. Morthal may be a Blackwater, but it's home, he said. Folks here, they're a tough breed, but they're good people. I don't fancy some monster picking us off one by one. If anything, it's bad for business. He forced a chuckle and then sighed. Truth is, Vigilant, my brother was among those taken years back by that monster Movarth. I never saw him again. I won't let something like that happen again if I can help it. The admission sounded earnest enough. I offered a nod of understanding, and I let the matter rest. The marsh parted around us like a murky curtain. Through wisps of fog, the dark outline of the chapel's back wall emerged. We grounded the skiff softly on the bank of mud and reeds. The chapel stood silent, its windows dark. Only the gentle gurgle of swamp water and the distant call of a night bird broke the stillness. Elvin disembarked and beckoned me to follow up a small rise toward the graveyard. We moved slowly, crouched low. My heart thudded against my ribs, adrenaline flooding me in anticipation of what may lay ahead. Behind an old stone shrine in the graveyard, half hidden by ferns, Elvin pointed out a patch of ground that looked slightly less overgrown. It's here, he mouthed. I knelt and felt around. My fingers found a small metal ring handle caked in grime. Beneath the draping moss was a wooden trapdoor, so well concealed I couldn't believe that I had missed it earlier. I cast a final glance at Elvin, who had his sword drawn, to give me a resolute nod. Gently I pulled the hatch open. It gave a low creak, and we both winced and held still. No immediate reaction from below. A foul draught exhaled from the darkness, a stench of damp stone and decay. The faintest orange glow danced on the rough-hewn walls of a staircase leading down, and there, echoing up from the depths, a muffled cry. A human voice, weak and pleading. My blood surged. We had to move, but blindly rushing in. No, we can't. I whispered to Elvin. Stay close. But let me go first, and whatever happens, don't let them cut off our escape." He nodded his head. I descended, mace in one hand, a small ward spell at the ready in the other. Each step was slick under my boots. The passage was earthen at first, then turned to old stone. A dozen steps down I could peer into a chamber, two figures visibly by a brazier's light. A hunched old woman in tattered gown humming a strange tune, and a tall, gaunt man with a predatory posture. My heart skipped. A quick glance at that man's face showed it eerily similar to Elvin's profile. But before I could fully process that, he spoke in a low hiss. "The Vigilant took the bait. He'll be here soon." The old woman cackled under her breath. Betrayal. My mind reeled, even as my body acted. In that instance, I knew that the smuggler had led me into a trap. Perhaps he was a vampire all along, or enthralled by them. Either way, it doesn't matter now. That gaunt creature wearing his face confirmed my worst fears. I inched back up the stairs, heart pounding. Elvin, the one behind me, was still lingering near the top. Had he heard the exchange? Was he about to stab me from behind? I had to act fast and decisively. I turned to the silhouette of Elvin above and said softly, "All clear so far. Come on down." He descended eagerly, perhaps thinking me oblivious. My muscles tensed with righteous fury, and when he drew near I exploded into action. I dropped my lantern and lunged at him, slamming him against the dark wall with my forearm at his throat. "You treacherous cur!" I snarled, but the words gave way to struggle. His eyes flared red in the gloom, fangs flashing as he let out a feral hiss. So the friendly smuggler guy's was a shed. With preternatural strength, he grappled me, nearly wrenching my arm away. But I had the advantage of armor and surprise. I brought my steel-clad knee up to his stomach and then cracked my mace across his face. Bones splintered, and he howled, staggering on the steps. Below, the creatures heard the commotion. A shriek of rage echoed up the old woman's voice, now a shrill, otherworldly screech. In an instant, the chamber erupted into chaos. The gaunt man with Elvin's likeness sprang towards the stairs with unnatural speed. Another shape, a younger woman with wild eyes and blood-stained lips, emerged from the shadows, claws bared. I had only a moment before they were upon me. The wounded vampire at my feet, Elvin's doppelganger, snarled and grabbed at my leg, trying to topple me. I answered with a swift downswing of my mace, crushing his skull against the stone step. His body went limp and silent, but there was no time to catch my breath. The others were now rushing up upon me. I backed up the last few steps into the open night air, unwilling to be cornered in that tunnel. The gaunt vampire was first to emerge, a rustled sword in hand. He slashed at me viciously. I parried with my mace, sparks flying as metal met metal. Behind him, the feral young woman crawled out on all fours, hissing like a disgusting animal. And just behind her, slowly and regally, the old woman ascended, her eyes gleaming in the darkness, filled with a crimson and ancient malice. Outnumbered 3-1 under the pale starlight, I circled to keep them in view. The gaunt swordsman feigned left and then thrust at me. I turned it aside, riposting with a bash of my shield. I had drawn it back from my back as I retreated. The blow caught his jaw. He grunted in pain. The feral girl darted to my flank, forcing me to pivot. Swiped at my face and I reeled back. Her claw still raked across my cheek, drawing blood. Pain flared hot, and I gritted my teeth. The old one finally stepped fully out of the crypt, unfazed by the chill mud under her bare feet. "Fool," she spat, voice echoing with ancient power. "You think you can challenge the mistress of this coven, Vigilant?" With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a bolt of crackling, purple energy, a spell of vile conjuration or pure force. I couldn't tell, but it smashed into my chest like a giant's fist, sending me skidding backward. I kept my footing, barely, boots plowing furrows in the muck. My shield and arm went numb from the impact. "Your blood will taste sweet, Vigilant," the old vampire groaned. "Moloch Baal thirsts." At that time a cold fury ignited in me. "Stendar rebuke you, hag," I shouted. They advanced as a pack, confident now that I was on the back foot. The gaunt one led with another flurry of sword strikes. I parried twice, thrice, his technique frenzied but relentless. In the corner of my eye I saw the young woman slinking around to my right, and the matriarch raising her hands to cast another curse. Time slowed, in the way it does in these kinds of battles. Instinct and faith had to guide me now. As the swordsman lunged again, I sidestepped and smashed my mace into his knee. The joint crumpled with a sick crunch. He howled and collapsed, no longer a threat, save for his grasping arms. The wild-eyed girl seized the opening and sprang at my throat. I dropped my mace and caught her wrists, stopping those clawed hands from inching at my neck. Oh, she was unnaturally strong. Face inches from mine, snarling and fangs snapping like a rabid dog. Her breath reeked of death and blood. With a roar, I summoned a surge of strength and head-butted her. The edge of my steel helm cracked against her skull, and she reeled back in a daze. But victory would still be hard-fought and far off. In that heartbeat, the elder vampire finished her spell. Black tendrils of shadow snaked from her fingertips and ensnared me. Entropic bindings. I'd heard of this magic, a conjuration of pure despair. I couldn't move. My limbs felt like lead. My spirit suddenly weighed down by dread. The crone stepped in closer, a cruel smile on her withered, wrinkled lip. "Do you feel it, Vigilant? Feel the futility of your cause?" My arm slackened. The horror crept into my mind. Images of endless night, of innocence I'd failed to save, of myself turning into a mindless thrall. No, I would not let her win. Summoning every shred of will and the ember of divine grace in my soul, I forced out a prayer through clenched teeth. "Stendar, give me strength." The amulet at my neck pulsed with divine light. A burst of warmth and courage flowed through me, shattering the illusion of despair. The spectral bindings evaporated into mist. The old vampire's eyes widened in surprise. Rare to see a Vigilant break such a spell. And I did not waste the moment. My mace lay at my feet. Instead of bending to grab it, I thrust out my now free hand toward the crone. Golden light swirled around my gauntlet as I cast Stendar's aura, a brilliant flash of holy energy radiating from my body. It was a lesser miracle. I had practiced many times, and against creatures of darkness, it was like sunlight concentrated. The effect was immediate. The matriarch shrieked and staggered back as the radiance burned her flesh away. The young vampire, just recovering from my head blow, was caught in it as well. She shrieked and fled back toward the open hatch of her lair, smoke wisping from her burning skin. Even the fallen swordsman moaned as the light seared him where he crawled in agony. Now it was my time. I had to advance. I strode towards the crone and with one fluid motion tore the bundled relic from my belt. I unveiled the fragment of Stendar's hammer. the engraved silver head catching the brazier's distant glow. The old vampire's expression twisted from rage to fear at the sight of that holy artifact. I roared, "For Stendar!" both my hands clasped around the relic's shaft, and swung with every ounce of my righteous fury. This heavy fragment struck her square in the chest. There was a sound like thunder as divine power surged through the weapon. The crone's ribcage collapsed inward, and she was hurled away, crashing into the stone altar behind her. A flash of light burst upon impact, Stendar's wrath made manifest. When my vision cleared, the ancient vampire lay crumpled and charred, the final death at last claiming her. Her body disintegrated into ash before my eyes, the dark magic sustaining her finally severed, and silence finally fell over the night. The only movement was the lazy swirl of ash in the air, and my own ragged breathing. The gaunt swordsman half crawled towards me despite his shattered knee, let out a gurgling hiss, trying to rise. Whatever unholy vigor had driven him was fading with his mistress's destruction. I limped over to his prone form and with grim resolve brought the fragment of the hammer down on his skull as one would crush a venomous snake. And his skull crunched, and he burst into dust, an anguished wheeze escaping as the last of his undeath finally came to an end. It was over. By Stendar's mercy, I stood still, covered in blood, battered, broken, but victorious. The profane darkness that had dwelt beneath the chapel was destroyed. And then I noticed it, the first pale light of dawn creeping into that sky. I descended once more into the crypt, careful, ready for any last threat. The brazier still flickered below, casting grotesque shadows over the stone walls, and the old crone's remains were nothing but ash drifting in that damp, disgusting air. Near the back of the chamber, I found what I prayed for. 2 terrified villagers chained to the wall, shaken but alive. They were weak and gaunt from abuse, but they were breathing. A young man and woman, Hafnar and Fiona. They gasped out their names as I gently reassured them. Both of them had puncture wounds at their necks, but the bleeding had stopped, likely kept alive as a supply of fresh blood. With a grunt of effort, I shattered their chains with the cobblestone and pommel of my dagger. "You're safe now. It's over." Fiona collapsed against me, sobbing in pain and relief. Hafnar, eyes sunken but grateful, murmured thanks over and over, clutching at my hand. I gave them what water and dried apples I carried, urging them to take small bites. A faint noise from above made me tense, the creak of wood and distant voices. And then I realized, Brother Thane. He must have rallied help. I'd been gone a couple hours at least, and the alarm bell I'd heard during the battle likely woke the town. With Hafnar leaning on me and Fiona holding my arm, I guided them up the stair and out of that accursed hole. Daybreak greeted us, with a crimson-tinted mist over the graves. At the edge of the yard I saw Brother Thane hurrying forward with a lantern, flanked by 2 of the Jarl's guards and a handful of the braver townsfolk clutching farming tools. Upon seeing us emerge, a cheer and a few choked sobs broke the silence. Thane rushed to Fiona's side, helping her stay upright, while the guards supported Hafnar. "The vampires? Are they?" one guard asked, sword trembling in his hand. "Gone. Yes, they're gone," I assured him, exhausted but triumphant. "The lair is purged." The nightmare is over. Brother Thane looked past me at the gaping hatch and the signs of struggle around it. Scorch marks, ashes, and the crumpled corpse of a vampire whose knee I'd smashed in. He made a sacred sign over his chest. Arcade be praised, and Stendar's justice be done. Then he clasped my hand tightly. Words failed him, but the gratitude in his eyes spoke true. He quickly beckoned people to help the freed captives back into the chapel for warmth and healing. And within the chapel, the survivors were laid on pews and wrapped in blankets. A few more villagers trickled in, drawn by the news and the tolling bell. Hafnar's wife flung her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Fiona's aged father clasped my hands, choking out thanks between quiet sobs. I offered what healing prayers I could, and Brother Thane administered potions of cure disease to ensure no cursed vampirism would take root in them. Jarl Igrid Ravencrone herself arrived not long after, having been roused from her own slumber. The wizened ruler surveyed the scene with her pale, insightful eyes. "So, it is true," she said softly. "Darkness dwelt between our very feet, and you have banished it with the coming dawn." She looked at me with a nod of deep respect. "You have done Morthal a service beyond measure, Vigilant. We will never forget this." Her housecarl handed me a small pouch of coin, a reward from the hold, and I bowed, accepting on behalf of the vigil, and assure them that it would go toward aiding others in need. Villagers gathered round as Brother Thane recounted in awe how we discovered the evil and fought it tooth and nail. He held up the silver relic of Stendar's hammer like a talisman of hope. Though I was loath to be lauded, I allowed them their moment of catharsis. After weeks of terror, they needed to celebrate their victory. Yorick, the skeptical hunter from the inn, clapped me on the back. "I misjudged you, Vigilant. You did right by us." "Thank you." I simply nodded, offering him a weary smile. "Your ringing of the chapel bell gave me the strength what I needed the most," I pointed out Brother Thane, and the priest flushed. But I really did mean every word. That brave act might have saved me. We spoke of the vampire Cunnan's cunning. It became clear that the smuggler Elvin had likely been a fiend in disguise all along, or a thrall from earlier times. No one in the town really knew him well. He arrived a few months back, ingratiating himself quietly, a perfect spy and agent for the Coven, earning their trust only to betray them. The townspeople were aghast at how close evil had lain them to a friendly mask. It was a sobering lesson, one that I took myself to heart, that's for sure. One guard reported finding a second pile of ashes deeper in the crypt's tunnel, likely the last fledgling who tried to hide or flee when her master fell. But we'd confirmed no vampires remained to haunt Morthal, at least for now. The morning sun rose higher. Its rays streamed through the chapel door, dispelling that last clinging gloom inside. Brother Thane lit a short service of thanksgiving and remembrance. We prayed for those who had been taken and lost. Some names had no living person to answer, implying not all victims survived or could be found. The townspeople lit candles for each soul, but despite the sorrow, there was hope in their voices now. When the prayers concluded, I stepped outside, fatigue weighing heavily upon me. The day was brightening, the mist evaporating. Guards had filled in the cursed crypt and sealed it. But Morthal felt different, still quiet, melancholy even. But some semblance of the oppressive dread had lifted, at least for now. By mid-morning, with the immediate crisis tended to, I knew it was time for me to continue my journey. The people of Morthal offered me a warm bed for the day and a feast to come that evening, but I politely declined. A vigilant's life is on the road, and there were others in Skyrim who might need Stendarr's hand as urgently as Morthal had. After a final check on Hafnar and Fiona, both resting, surrounded by loved ones, I gathered up my things. Brother Thane met me near the town gates. In his arms he carried a fragment of Stendarr's hammer wrapped in linen. "This belongs to you now," he insisted. I opened my mouth to protest. Surely such a relic should be safeguarding the chapel, but he raised a hand. "No, Vigilant, please. You proved yourself its rightful bearer. Let it travel with you, that our gratitude travels with it, and may it smite evil wherever you roam." I accepted the heavy relic with a deep bow of reverence, strapping it securely to my back. It would serve as a reminder of Morthal's deliverance, and perhaps I'd use it in battles yet to come. A small crowd gathered to see me off. The Jarl offered formal thanks once more, and her housecarl handed me a sealed letter. A recommendation to the nobles of any hold, should you need aid or hospitality, the Jarl explained. Such an honor was beyond my expectation. I was grateful and humbled. Fiona, pale but standing with newfound courage, pressed a wooden carving into my hand, a tiny figure of a moth. "I carved it from the old birch by the chapel," she said softly. "Moths are said to carry the souls of the departed to Aetherius. Let this one remind you of those you saved, and those you still seek to save." I closed her fingers around mine briefly in thanks, promising to treasure it. And with farewell said, I set out along the winding road leaving Morthal. The morning sun was fully ablaze, burning away the last tatters of mist and fog, and each step I took felt lighter than the last as the distance grew between me and them, lighter with relief that their nightmare was truly ended. Yet I carry the deep weight of the knowledge that my work is never truly done. Behind me, Morthal would heal and continue, scars and all. Before me, the open roads of Skyrim beckoned, and with them, no doubt, new evil to confront. My friend, I pause in my recounting now, gazing into your intent eyes across this tavern table. The fires burned low, more embers casting long shadows. And so, that is how the worshippers of Morthal were saved, and how the hidden fangs of the night were pulled from their midst. You release a breath you'd been holding. I can tell the tale gripped you. It still grips my own heart. Outside the tavern's walls, the wind howls softly, perhaps a reminder that Skyrim's darkness is ever near, held at bay by brave souls and bright hearts. What did I do next? Well, there's always another evil, my friend. I tell you of rumors I've heard, a coven of Daedra worshippers stirring trouble near the border of High Rock, whispers of a child's laughter echoing at midnight in an abandoned home in Windhelm. My path is set to investigate these and more. Perhaps I'll tell you about them one day. But one thing is sure, the Vigilant of Stendarr never rests while abominations roam free. Wherever the innocent suffer and the wicked prey, I will go. Stendarr's light will guide me through the darkness. Rising from my seat, I place a few septums on the table and clasp your shoulder warmly. Thank you for listening. May the Eight protect you on your own road. I leave you then, pulling my cloak against the chill as I step outside. Over the eastern mountains, dawn approaches yet again, painting in the sky promise. I take a deep breath of the crisp air. Evil may lurk in every shadow, but as long as I draw breath, none shall go unchecked. And so with Stendarr's symbol at my breast, and the taste of victory still sweet, I carry on into the morning, into whatever battle awaits me. Perhaps death, but still, faithful, unyielding, I am ready to face the darkness, wherever they gnash their teeth. My dear friend, I write to you with a heavy heart, in hopes that you will understand the great tragedy that has befallen me. It was only last night, under a moonless sky near the city of Riften, that I lost the life I once knew. And so now, I recount these events to you as sincerely as I can, though the tale brings me great pain. I came to my senses the following night, curled up in a corner of an abandoned stable outside of Riften. The air was cold, heavy with the smells of wet hay and decay. Through the wooden slats I saw the faint glow of the city's lights, but more overpowering was the scent that hit me. That warm, unmistakable coppery perfume. Blood. I flooded my senses, igniting a hunger so fierce it twisted my stomach into knots. Disoriented, I touched my neck and found a partially healed bite wound. And there it was. In a rush, my memory returned. Walking home late beneath a starless sky, an attack, a sudden jolt from the shadows, 2 fangs piercing my skin. I should have died on that road. I wished I had of. But instead, I awakened as something new, something terrible. My heart, it no longer pounded with life as it once did. It was only the hunger that drove me now. When I brushed my trembling fingers over my lips, I felt them curl around 2 sharp canine fangs. A sob rose in my throat. The truth set in. I'd become one of them. A vampire. Those beasts from oblivion, walking the earth now. I wanted to believe it was all a nightmare. I prayed in silence to the divines for mercy, but no comfort ever came. My body was changed. Stronger, colder, more alive in the night than ever. Yet undeniably, I was cursed. I realized daylight had nearly claimed me while I lay there in a stupor earlier. Beginner's mistake. A single ray of dawn that crept through the stable's boards had seared my skin, forcing me to burrow deeper into those shadows. The sun had become lethal to me now, and I was doomed to skulk around in the darkness. But worse than the sunlight's burn, there was something else. The thirst. It throbbed in the very marrow of my bones. My throat felt dry and raw, as if I'd swallowed hot ash. I'd never felt anything like it before. It was a compulsion. Every time the wind carried the hint of a living soul nearby, my entire body tensed up with yearning. I could hear the distant pulse of life in Riften. Oh, so many souls. Footsteps of a late wanderer. Muffled laughter from the inn. A drunkard stumbling home. Easy prey. Each sound accompanied by the imagined taste of blood. I clamped my hands over my ears and mouth, desperate to keep control. I thought of my daughter, Livia. That memory, like a rope anchoring me to my lost humanity. I'd promised to come home to her last night, with a sack of honey candies from the market. But instead I'm here, hiding like a wounded animal, fighting off the urge to become a predator. I told myself I would not harm anyone, that I could resist this evil urge. For a time I huddled in that rotting stable, repeating the promise in my mind. I'm still Aurelia. I will not become a monster. I won't become one of them. But as the minutes crawled by, the hunger, it only sharpened. It was as if every beat of a human heart in the distance called out to me, a siren song, tempting me to come and drain them. My fangs ached, and I shivered with need, pressed against the stall wall, as though physical distance couldn't separate me from my own craving. And my resolve finally snapped when I heard footsteps outside the stable. A dim lantern glow danced upon that wall. Someone was approaching quietly. Aurelia? Aurelia, are you here? A familiar voice called out. I know that voice. It was Mira, my neighbor, my friend. She must have organized a search when I never came home. Oh, divines bless her. For a moment, there was relief, but then dread. I wanted to shout out a warning, tell her to stay away, but I was paralyzed. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was shame. Probably both. Mira edged into the stable, lantern raised at eye height, and her eyes found me huddled in the corner pathetically. Oh, thank the eight. There you are, she gasped, stepping in closer. I must have looked like a dreadful state. Blood stained my dress. My eyes glinted like an animal's in that lantern light. Her smile of relief faltered as she took in my appearance. She took a step back, eyes widened. Aurelia, what happened to you? Are you hurt? I opened my mouth to respond, to beg her to leave, but oh, divines, the scent of the blood. Oh, it hit me with full force. Mira had a small cut on her forearm, a scrape from brambles during her search, and a thin trickle of blood. Oh, it may as well have been a feast laid out before a starving beggar. The hunger roared back to life. It obliterated every thought that I had. My friend's concerned face became nothing but the promise of satiation. I lunged at her, faster than a blink could tell. Mira managed a startled gasp before we tumbled into the dirt. In that heartbeat, that monstrous instinct, it took over me completely. I sank my teeth into her throat. The blood was so hot, metallic, and alive. It rushed into my mouth. It was ecstasy and horror all at once. She struggled weakly, a choked whimper escaping her lips, and by the time I regained a sliver of control, she was crumpled beneath me, trembling as her lifeblood spilled out. The savage thirst in my veins, it was quenched, but at the unspeakable cost of the life of my dearest friend. Mira's eyes were glassy with shock and pain. She was looking up at me, weakly grasping at my shoulders, and I heard her rasp Why? Why, Aurelia? My mind snapped back, and I recoiled in my own revulsion at what I had just done. I released her and staggered backwards. Mira collapsed onto her side. Oh, a hand pressed to the wound on her neck that I'd torn open so savagely, red seeping between her fingers. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. All that came out was a ragged moan. I crawled back to my friend and tried to staunch the bleeding with my shaking hands. Mira, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Mira. I babbled, desperate and useless, a pathetic victim. Her blood smeared on my hands and face, the same warm crimson that just moments ago had tasted sweeter than any wine, now turned my stomach with guilt. Mira's eyes found mine. In them I saw fear. Worse, I saw a recognition, a realization of what I had become. She opened her mouth as if to speak again. Perhaps she meant to plead for her life, or ask after my daughter. I'll never know. Her breathing shuddered, and then stopped, and her body went limp. My beautiful friend, who'd only wanted to save me, only wanted to help, and she was now dead, and it was all my fault. I cradled her lifeless form and rocked back and forth in agony, a keening cry rising from my throat. I had done this. The scent of death and spilled blood saturated the stable. Oh, I wanted to tear out those cursed fangs, those canines of mine, undo this nightmare. But it was all too late. In a span of minutes, I had become a murderer, a monster. Through the haze of sorrow, one thought blazed clearly. Livia, my daughter. Mira had left her in another neighbor's care while she searched for me. I recalled her mentioning that just the other day. But Mira would not be returning to take Livia into her arms. No one would. Oh, my little girl. She was all alone now. Unless I intervened. But how could I intervene? There's this monster. I'm a danger to everybody. I looked down at Mira's cooling body, and I realized with sick certainty that I couldn't stay. I couldn't even mourn her. If I remained here, more people would eventually come looking. What if I killed them too? Maybe even endanger my child in a blind frenzy. Oh, with a broken sob, I laid Mira gently on the ground, and I closed her staring eyelids. Forgive me, my friend, I whispered, though I knew I deserved no forgiveness. And then I forced myself to stand. My veins burned with fresh blood, granting me unnatural strength and clarity, and I loathed every bit of it. But I would have to use that strength now, for the last shred of good that my soul can do. I would ensure my daughter's safety, no matter what. I fled the stable, disappearing into the night before any others could arrive. The taste of my friend's blood still coated my tongue, and the horror of it propelled me onward. I had a final duty to fulfill, and very little time to do it. I reached my cottage on the outskirts of Riften near midnight. The door was ajar. Inside, Little Livia sat curled on the floor, clutching a ragged, stuffed rabbit, eyes red from crying. The moment she saw me, she sprang up. "Mama," she cried. Relief and anguish mingled in that single word. She ran into my arms before I could even think to stop her. Her small form collided with me, warm and alive. I held my breath, terrified that her scent or the close press of her heartbeat would trigger that monstrous hunger again. But I'd fed. I was full of blood, and for the moment, I seemed to be in control. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight, memorizing the feel of her head against my shoulder and the sound of her hiccuping sobs. Ah, my sweet girl. She was safe. For the moment. "You were gone so long," Livia wept softly. "Miss Mira said she would find you." "I was so scared, Mama." Fresh guilt stabbed through me. How could I tell her that the beloved Auntie Mira would never return? I forced a gentle tone. "I know, but I'm here now." My voice cracked, and I blinked back blood-tinged tears. I had to stay composed. I couldn't fall apart in front of her. Not now. Livia pulled back just enough to look at me. In the dim light of a single candle I'd left burning, she noticed the dried blood on my collar and the strange pallor of my skin. Her brows knotted in confusion, but then worry. "Mama, are you hurt? And why do you feel so cold?" "I'm all right," I lied softly. "Of course I'm cold. It's cold outside, right? And I've just gotten home. I'm tired, too." I brushed off a strand of hair from her face with trembling fingers. Oh, okay. She looked so much like her father when she frowned. A thought that nearly undid me then and there. But I held fast. I knew what I had to do. I knew it had to be done quickly. Before dawn. Before I lost my courage. Fighting back my tears, I rose and went to fetch her warm cloak and shoes. My hand shook as I dressed her for travel. "Where are we going?" she asked in a small voice, sensing the urgency in my movements. "Mum, it's so late. Shouldn't we sleep? It's cold outside. I don't want to go." I forced a smile that I'm sure looked painfully false. "We're going on a little adventure, my moonbeam. Just into the city." "Now? At night?" She rubbed her eyes, confusion mixing with lingering fear. "Is Miss Mira coming too?" Oh, that question. That was like a dagger twisting in my heart. "No," I managed to say. "Just you and me." I packed a small satchel with a few of her belongings, a spare dress, some bread, the honey candies I'd promised her. My hands lingered on each item, knowing I'd likely never pack for her again. Livia watched in worried silence, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When everything was ready, I took her by the hand. Oh, it was so warm and trusting in mind. I nearly lost my nerve. But that memory of Mira's blood on my lips, I could still taste it, and it steeled me. I couldn't risk hurting Livia. This is the only way. It has to happen. Keeping to the shadows, I led my daughter through Riften's mist-laden streets. The city was hushed at this hour. Aside from a single guard on patrol far ahead, not a soul was stirring. Only the distant creak of wooden docks and the whisper of our own soft steps accompanied us as we slipped through the alleys. Before long, we stood before the looming wooden doors of Honor Hall Orphanage. Livia immediately realized where we were. The hanging sign with its crude painting of happy children, it couldn't mask the reality. She knew of this place from whispers, that it was where children without parents went. Her grip on my hand tightened fiercely. "Mama, I don't want to go in there," she pleaded, voice quavering. Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled down my cheeks, and I knelt down to face her, pushing back my hood so she could see the earnestness in my eyes. In that moment, I didn't care if she saw the monstrous change in me, the faint glow in my irises, or the sharp canines behind my lips. I needed her to see the mother who loved her beyond anything, not a monster in the dark. "My darling girl," I whispered, cupping her wet cheeks. "You have to be strong now. Mother is very sick. I have to go away for a while to get better. And where I'm going, I can't take you with me." She was already shaking her head in frantic denial, tears spilling anew. "No, Mama, I'll be good. I'll help you. Just don't leave me, please." She flung her arms around my neck, sobbing desperately into my cloak. I hugged her tightly, rocking her a little as if both of us started to cry. This was the hardest moment of my life. Harder than facing death, harder than fighting the thirst. I wanted nothing more than to say, "Never mind, I'll stay with you forever, and accept whatever doom came just to spare her this pain for that moment." But I knew that would be far worse in the end. Gently, I pried her arms from me, though she fought with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Livia," I said, my voice trembling. "The people in this home will look after you. You'll have other children to play with, teachers to learn from. You'll be safe here." She looked at the orphanage door and back at me, panic and hurt written plain on her face. In that instant, she was old enough to grasp what was happening. "You're leaving me," she choked out, eyes wide with betrayal. Oh, my heart broke into pieces. "I don't want to, Livia. I have to. Because if I don't, I might hurt you." My mask of calm shattered, and a sob escaped me. "The sickness I have, it makes me not myself. I'd rather die than harm a hair on your head. This is the only way I can keep you safe." She was crying openly now, each of her quiet wails slicing through me. I fumbled at my neck and removed the pendant I always wore, a little silver crescent moon. Pressing it into Livia's small hand, I closed her fingers around it. "Livia, listen to me. This was your grandmother's pendant. Keep it to remember that I love you. No matter what happens, no matter how far away I am, I promise, I will always love you. Always." Livia stared at the pendant in her palm, then flung herself at me one last time. "Please, please don't go," she begged, her whole body shaking. I held on to her as long as I dared, my soul shattering with each of her sobs. And at last, I heard footsteps approaching inside the orphanage. The headmistress, roused by the commotion. If she found me here, pale and fanged, she would raise an alarm and only make this ordeal more horrific. The time had come. I pulled back and kissed my daughter's forehead, tasting the salt of her tears. "Be brave, my little moonbeam," I whispered. And then before my resolve could crumble, I stood and knocked hard on the orphanage door. Livia gasped and tried to grab onto my cloak, but I slipped from her grasp and stepped back into the shadows. The door creaked open, spilling amber light onto the doorstep. An older woman peered out, lantern in hand. "What on earth?" I heard her mutter. "Child, what are you doing out at this hour?" My mum," Livia tried to speak through her sobs, turning to look for me. But I was hidden from her view, pressed against the side of a porch, watching, wiping my own silent tears. The matron tutted her tongue and ushered Livia gently inside. "There now. Come in, you poor dear." As the doors closed, Livia's tear-filled eyes frantically scanned the darkness, searching for me. I caught a final glimpse of her face, lips forming a wordless plea, before the latch of that door clicked shut. Oh, it took every ounce of my will not to run to that door and wrench it open again. But instead I slumped against the wall of the orphanage, listening to my child's muffled cries on the other side. In that moment, I wanted the night to swallow me whole. I'd saved her from the monster I'd become, but the cost was a wound in both of our hearts that would never fully heal. I stayed only until I was sure she had been safely taken inside. Her sobs eventually faded to soft whimpers, and I imagined the matron settling her into a bed, offering her what little comfort she could. My little girl. She'd live. She would grow. Hopefully in time she'd forget this night, or at least forget the terror. Remember that I only did what I had to do. As for me, I had nothing left but the shadow. And so, I've written all of this by the waning light of the moons to you, my friend. And now you know the truth of why I vanished. I sit beneath the boughs of an old pine as I pen these words, the taste of salt, tears, and spilled blood still on my tongue. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I burdened you with such a tale. But you deserve to know what became of the person that you once called a friend. Dawn's approaching as I write these final lines, and I have one final request. Should you ever meet a young girl in Riften with a silver crescent pendant around her neck and sorrow in her eyes, please watch over her if you can. She is my Livia. Tell her one day, when she's old enough to understand, that her mother loved her more than all the stars in the sky. Now the eastern horizon begins to glow. I think I will not seek shelter from the coming sun. Perhaps, in its light, I'll finally find the peace that has eluded me on this bitter night. Farewell, my dear friend. May the divines protect you better than they protected me. Sincerely, Aurelia. I awoke, dripping water, the stench of old death around me. My arms were yanked above me, iron shackles biting into my wrists, and a throbbing pain pulsed at the back of my skull. That was where I'd been struck. For a long moment, I knew only darkness and agony. But finally blinking, I forced my eyes to adjust to a dim, bluish glow. Giant, luminescent mushrooms, they loomed all around, casting an eerie light across damp cavern walls. And in that pallid glow, I recognized the angular silhouettes of Dwemer stonework, gears and metal piping jutted from the rock. This had to be it. This was Black Reach, the legendary subterranean city. Geodes glimmered in the cavern walls, reflecting the turquoise fungal glow. Far off in those shadows, I heard the faint chitter of a chorus, insects skittering around, and the Falmer skulking there in the dark. I was deep, deep beneath Skyrim, in this prison of an ancient Dwemer ruin. I tested my bonds. The chains rattled loudly, echoing throughout that vast cave, and at that sound, a low growl emanated from somewhere to my left. I turned, eyes narrowing. There, only a few paces away, another figure was shackled to the wall. He was a broad-shouldered man, bare-chested, filthy, and bloodied, straining futilely against his chains. His head hung low until the rattle of my movement made him snap it up, and our eyes met, somewhere there in the gloom. I realized his were an unnatural shade of yellow. A feral snarl ripped from his throat. Even before the pale light revealed the lengthening canines and the wild, lupine glare, I knew exactly what he was. Werewolf. My muscles tensed with instinctive dread. Of all the foes a vampire like me might fear, a werewolf ranks pretty high. Yet here I was, chained, right there next to one. The man, if one could still call him that, yanked at his bonds, muscles cording with preternatural strength. Flecks of foam edged at his lips. He was on the verge of losing control. "You," he rasped, voice thick and guttural. "Vampire." He practically spat the word at me. "And you're a werewolf," I responded quietly, baring my own fangs at him. We glared at each other across the slim gap between our chains, and his body was quivering, whether from pain or the effort of resisting a transformation. I couldn't tell. Perhaps it was both. Werewolves are said to assume wolf-like forms during the full moon, and I suspected that that time was near. The cavern's eerie glow was beginning to mingle with a faint white radiance filtering in from somewhere above. He reeked of sweat, blood, and wet fur, even in human form. I'm sure he caught my scent as well, the cold staleness of death that clings to my kind. Perhaps we are just two sides of the same cursed coin. But for a moment, we were two predators, eyeing each other off in the gloom, each at the end of our leash. I noticed heavy shackles on his limbs engraved with faintly glowing runes, likely enchanted restraints to hold a monster as formidable as him. My own felt merely heavy, not magical. Still, they sapped my strength all the same. A tense silence hung between us. His amber eyes never left me. Hircine's beast, and Molag Bal's blood drinker. It's a grim thought. Kind of ironic. but by some cruel trick of fate, a werewolf and vampire had been caught together by the divines. Perhaps they watched on and smirked. We'd never know. What we did know is that our kind had been enemies since the dawn of legend, the children of opposing Daedric lords. I knew well the origin of my cursed blood. Molag Bal himself spawned the first vampire in those ancient days, and Hircine, the father of man-beasts, bestowed the curse of lycanthropy to create werewolves a long time ago. Two cursed predators, creations of rival princes, now chained up as captives side by side. The werewolf curled his lip at me. "I can smell you. I can smell your stink, you leech," he growled. His fingers fletched, nails beginning to blacken and sharpen. He was perilously close to losing his human shape, I could tell, and I snarled back reflexively, though I kept my voice low. "And I smell you, you wet dog. Believe me, the aroma is not much more pleasant." My throat was parched. I realized with a spike of discomfort that I was desperately thirsty. How long had it been since I last fed? I'd forgotten. That memory was hazy. I recalled being on the surface, hunting, and then an ambush. Pain. Nothingness. And now here, in this damned place. My hunger was mounting by the second. That beast inside me was clawing for sustenance, and the presence of warm-blooded prey just feet away made me acutely aware of it. I swallowed hard and tore my gaze from the pulsing artery in the werewolf's neck. I had to focus. If I lost control now, chained or not, the outcome would not be pretty for either of us. A scuff of footsteps on stone saved me from further hostility. From a tunnel on the far side of the cavern chamber, a tall, thin figure emerged, hooded in tattered black robes. The newcomer carried a faint mage light in one hand, casting a wobbling shadow, and I caught the glint of a sacrificial dagger and the outline of a staff at his back. He stepped with a confident, almost eager gait. The robed man set down his mage-light orb on stone outcrop and pushed back his hood. In the mushroom glow, I saw a gnawed face, etched with hunger of a different sort. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with shadow, yet they gleamed with manic excitement. Dried blood spat at the front of his once blackened robes. When he smiled, it revealed the teeth filed disturbingly sharp. Divines. A necromancer. I finally realized it, noting that sickly, sweet odor of death that clung to him. "Well, well," the pale man crooned, clapping his hands softly. "Our guests are finally awake." The werewolf responded with a snarling curse and renewed struggling. They're not known for holding their tempers. I bared my fangs, but I held my tongue, just watching. The necromancer approached to loom over us, his expression one of triumph and glee. I saw not now the strange symbols that had been painted on the stone floor around us in blood. The metallic tang of it hung thick in the air. At the chamber's center, just a few yards away, an ornate ritual circle was drawn. My stomach turned as I realized it was our blood that had likely contributed to those markings. Necromancer's voice dropped to a reverent whisper. "Two enemies, sworn foes of old, bound in chains side by side. Here's just how the prophecy foretells it. He chuckled, a wet, rasping sound. Oh, the gods, they favor me indeed this night. I exchanged a weary glance with the werewolf. His chest was heaving, ragged breaths soaring in and out. I could see sweat beading on his skin as whatever potion or spell kept him human slowly began to wear off. A vein throbbed at his temple. "What do you want with us?" I demanded, tearing my eyes from the wolfman's obvious distress. "Why chain a vampire and a werewolf here? You better speak quickly, worm, or release me, or I'll show you a damn quick end." It was an empty threat, given my position. But I had to keep the necromancer's focus on me, away from that struggling werewolf who looked moments away from snapping out of those restraints. The robed Nord tisked under his breath. "Such fire. You'll need that strength soon. But save some for the ritual, He paced before us with hands clasped behind his back, affecting a scholarly air. This fiend fancies himself a part of the Mages Guild. Look at him. You have both been chosen. An honor you cannot possibly appreciate. The blood moon is at its zenith this night. Its power will fuel a magnificent convergence of dark energies with your blood. Vampire, lycanthrope combined. I will open the true path to immortality. The ideal union of beast and knight." His eyes glittered madly. Clearly he was quite insane. For those words, he truly believed them, and they chilled me. Blood moon, union of beast and knight. I'd heard of depraved rituals in my decades of unlife, but this was different. Did he mean to mix our blood in some abominable rite? My stomach churned at the thought. The werewolf barked a harsh, bitter laugh beside me. "Use our blood. You won't live to see it done, mage." He bared his own lengthening fangs, not as pronounced as mine, but more than a human. But those fingernails, they had darkened into claws. Despite the situation, a spark of admiration admittedly flickered within me. He was resisting his transformation with remarkable will, clinging to speech and reason. But how long? How long would it be until the full moon's call overwhelmed him? The necromancer only smiled wider at the werewolf's threat. "Oh, but I will see it done. In fact, it begins now." He raised his arms, and I noticed a strange device clutched in one hand. A Dwemer artifact. Some kind of thing. All brass gears and crystal lenses. The cavern ceiling above the ritual circle housed a massive, focusing crystal that hummed to life as he manipulated the device. I realized with alarm what he was doing. Through some crack or mechanism high above, a beam of pure moonlight suddenly speared down into the chamber, illuminating the blood-drawn circle in argent radiance. The light of the full moon, here in Black Reach, maybe for the first time ever. At that ethereal glow, the werewolf stiffened, a groan spilling from his lips. His body began to convulse, muscles bulging against his chains. The full moon's influence was hammering at his control, and without a doubt, it would soon break it. The necromancer stepped toward me, producing a curved ritual dagger. He grasped a fistful of my hair and yanked my head back, exposing my throat. I hissed back at him. You should have seen me struggle. But those chains, they held me fast. The silvered edge of the dagger pressed against my neck and drew a thin line of blood. "Stay still now," the robe man whispered almost lovingly. "No need to waste it. I'm going to need every drop." I went rigid, fangs bared, but utterly helpless. Oh, my mind was racing. I'd known fear many times in my long life, but this moment, it ranked among the worst. Chained, weakened, about at my throat, cut by a madman, while an enraged werewolf burst into full fury beside me. Some part of me protested. This cannot be how it ends. Suddenly, the werewolf's snarl cut through the chamber, echoing off the walls. "Get away! Get away from him!" he roared. In a feat of ferocity, he lunged against his bounds with all his might. Those enchanted chains holding his arms cracked the stone they were bolted to, startling the necromancer into stumbling back from me. Snarling in frustration, our captor whirled on the werewolf. He began chanting these guttural words, and black energy coiled from his free hand, lashing out to bind the werewolf's limbs. My fellow prisoner howled as shadowy fetters tightened around him, holding his advance mere inches from the necromancer's face. The Nord mage sneered. "Patience, you beast. Your time comes soon. First, the blood of the immortal." He rounded on me again. I knew then that no help was coming, save what we made for ourselves. We had to act, and we had to act fast. The full moon's power was flooding the chamber. I could feel it in the prickling of the hairs on my arms and the restless shifting of the werewolf beside me. The necromancer raised his dagger once more, preparing for a deep cut. My heart, long since stopped, could not pound, of course, but certainly a surge of panic can hit me all the same. After all, I am part human. "Wait," I roused desperately. "You've overlooked something." He paused, the dagger hovering. "Oh, have I? And what might that be? Go on then, spit it out." I darted a glance at the werewolf. The man-beast met my eyes, understanding passing wordlessly between us. We both knew we had to work together. No other choice than that. Drawing on every ounce of my will, I mustered a contemptuous smirk at the necromancer. "You said that you want every drop of my blood. Won't do you much good if I've starved, will it?" I nodded at the emptied blood potion vial he'd tossed aside earlier. A stalling tactic, and a risky one, but it was all I had. "I'm already weak. Look at me. Perform your ritual now and you'll get nothing but a shriveled corpse." The necromancer hesitated, thin lips pursing. I pressed on, voice dripping scorn. "Did your precious prophecy not mention that the vampire must be nourished? Powerful? My kind aren't exactly known for our generosity of blood, I'm sure you understand. If you want power from it, you'll need me fed. Otherwise you're just wasting your damn time." It was half bluff, half truth. A starved vampire's blood is certainly less potent. Behind the necromancer, the werewolf had gone deathly quiet. Sensing my gambit, the gnawed mage narrowed his eyes at me. I could almost hear the cogs in his fevered brain turning, and at last he lowered the dagger a fraction. Fed, you say? Maybe you have a point. A small point. He glanced at the werewolf, then back at me. I saw resolve harden in his face. Very well, a minor delay. The necromancer stepped away and moved towards the rusted cage of supplies. My heart leapt. He had bought the ruse. He rustled around and produced a fresh potion of blood from among my confiscated gear. I recognized the crimson liquid in the glass instantly. Striding back, the necromancer uncorked the bottle and unceremoniously thrust it to my lips. Drink, but know this, when you're done, I expect you strong enough to bleed thoroughly. I didn't need further prompting. I choked down the thick, vitae-like brew in greedy gulps. It was not as satisfying as feeding on a living victim. It never is. But I felt immediate relief as the liquid coursed through me. The haze of weakness receded slightly. My vision sharpened. Strength returned to my limbs in a welcome flood. The necromancer watched me with glee, no doubt imagining I was fattening myself up for some slaughter. And in truth, I was. Preparing for his slaughter, that is. As soon as I finished, he snatched the empty vial away. Excellent. It's done. We proceed. He stepped back into the circle, lifting his arms to resume the chant that had been interrupted. The beam of moonlight from above was intensifying, bathing the chamber in a ghostly radiance. The sigils on the floor began to shimmer. The werewolf locked eyes with me. His human visage was barely holding. His features had twisted, nails and teeth elongated, coarse hair bristling on his skin. He was moments from transforming completely. And when that happened, enchanted chains or not, all bets were off. He'd either break free and lose himself to frenzy, killing everything in reach, or remain bound and be an easy target for the dagger. Maybe I had seconds to act, perhaps even less. I flexed my now strengthened arms, testing the shackles, and I felt the iron give slightly. The potion had done its work. My power surged anew. Quietly I began twisting my wrists, trying to slip free or find some leverage. My right hand brushed something tucked into the frayed lining of my pants. Divines, I forgot about it. It's a lockpick. A tiny sliver of steel, overlooked by my captor in his haste. Bless Nocturnal's luck. I always kept a spare pick hidden on my person, and for once, fortune had smiled upon me. Casting a furtive glance, I saw the necromancer fully absorbed in his ritual now, chanting verses in forbidden tongues. He swayed within the circle, arms upraised. The focused crystal above blazed with white light. Shadows danced wildly around us, and I caught the werewolf's attention with a soft hiss. "Hold on," I whispered, praying he still understood me. "I'm getting us out." His lips pulled back from his teeth. It might have been a grimace or a grin, but I chose to interpret it as agreement. He growled under his breath, a sound of pain and effort as he fought the change for a few moments. With trembling fingers, I worked the slim lockpick into the keyhole of my left wrist shackle. The first tumbler clicked, and then the second. My heart, or whatever passes for one in me, soared as the cuff sprang open. Blood flowed back into my left hand with pins and needles-like sensations, and now the right. But suddenly, the necromancer's voice rose in a triumphant cry. The ritual circle ignited with bluish flame, and he turned toward us, raising the sacrificial dagger again, ready to draw our blood at the height of the incantation. His eyes widened as he noticed my left arm free, the open shackle dangling. You wretch, he snarled, realizing that I'd picked the lock. With a flick of his fingers, he launched a spell at me, a crackling bolt of lightning. A fierce jolt hit me square in the chest, blasting me back against the wall. I screamed as pain arced through every nerve. The smell of charred flesh filled my nose. Worse that it was my own. My muscles spasmed. The lockpick flew from my grasp. The necromancer advanced, face twisted in rage. He raised his dagger to strike at my exposed, half-free form, when an animal-like roar shook the chamber. In that split second, the werewolf finally succumbed. The chains snapped like twigs. The Northman's bodies erupted into a hulking, bestial form. One moment he was half-human, fighting his curse. The next, a towering, black-furred werewolf standing in his place, freed of all bonds. Claws as long as daggers gleamed in the moonlight. The beast's maw yawned in a fearsome howl, revealing fangs made to rend and tear flesh. The necromancer stumbled back, shock and fear contorting his features. Before he could utter another spell, the werewolf launched at him with a sound that was half snarl, half battle cry. The enormous creature slammed into the robed man, and they both went crashing into the ritual circle, scattering candles and ritual instruments. I gritted my teeth through my own pain and forced my remaining hand to move. My right wrist was still chained, but with my left free, I frantically snatched the fallen lockpick from the floor. Fingers numb and twitching from the lightning, I jammed the pick into the lock and jiggled it feverishly. At last, it clicked open. The manacle released, and my right arm dropped. Weak, but free. I nearly sobbed in relief. My ankles, those shackles had no locks, only heavy clasps. I tore at them, ignoring the searing burn of silver on my skin. The metal singed and smoked, but adrenaline bore me up through the pain. With inhuman strength, I wrenched the fetters apart, freeing my legs. I was loose, just in time. The werewolf and necromancer were a tangle of limbs and fury. The beast had swiped the dagger away and pinned the mage down, slavering jaws snapping inches from the Nord's face. The necromancer had managed to wedge his staff between them, holding the werewolf's throat at bay while he spat incantations. Shadowy spikes materialized and drove into the werewolf's torso. The creature yelped, momentarily stunned, as dark magic sapped his strength. Snarling, the necromancer threw out his hand, and a pulse of necrotic energy blasted the werewolf off him. The great black form went skidding across the stones, crashing into a Dwemer pillar with a pained whine. The mage staggered to his feet, bleeding from deep claw wounds, and hurled a firebolt at his foe. An orange explosion lit the cavern in flames, engulfing the werewolf's side, and the beast howled in agony, rolling to extinguish the fire, the acrid smell of burnt fur billowing through. For me, it was now or never. With a feral hiss, I sprinted forward, closing the distance in a blink of an eye. The necromancer whirled, just as I reached him. I raked my clawed nails across his face, drawing 4 bloody lines, and a scream echoed out from his throat. He struck back with his staff, the bone head sweeping toward my temple. I ducked under the swing with preternatural grace. All my pain, all my fear had transmuted into predatory focus. This mortal fool thought to sacrifice me, to use me. He had no idea the kind of death that he had courted. I drove my fist into his gut, knocking the wind from him, then followed with an elbow across his jaw. I heard some bones crunch. The necromancer reeled, spitting out blood, and I swore I saw a few teeth. There I pounced, fangs aiming for his exposed neck. I would drink him dry, drain his life into mine. But he recovered with uncanny tenacity, a burst of magic throwing me back before I could sink my teeth in. I slid across the ground, righting myself near the pile of our confiscated gear. My hands landed upon cold steel. It was my dagger. Swift as thought, I snatched up my blade and flung it. The throwing dagger whirled end over end and buried itself hilt deep into the necromancer's thigh. He shrieked, collapsing to one knee. Before he could pull it out, a massive dark shape loomed up behind him. The werewolf, smoking and enraged, had recovered from the mage's blast. With a snarl, the beast lunged and sunk its jaws into the necromancer's staff arm. The crunch of bone was loud, but not as loud as the scream. With one violent shake of his great head, the werewolf ripped the arm clean off the necromancer's body, blood spraying in a gruesome arc. The staff and severed limb clattered to the floor. The necromancer's eyes went wide in shock as he stared at the stump where his limb had once been. He opened his mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse, but no sound emerged but a wet death rattle. The werewolf was then upon him without mercy. I turned away as the beast tore out the necromancer's throat in a single horrific bite. And then the gurgling ceased. But the werewolf, he was not satisfied. Years of instinctual hatred, pain, and fury unleashed in that single moment. He raked the corpse with claws, rending flesh from bone. The necromancer's body was mangled and torn in seconds, indistinguishable from what it had once been. The savage snarling gradually subsided into a heavy panting, and it was all over. Silence fell, broken only by the dip of blood from the remains of a crackling few fires burning on scattered tapestries. I realized I was breathing quite hard, more from adrenaline than necessity. My entire body trembled with the aftershock of combat and near death. Across the chamber, the werewolf stood over what was left of our captor, chest heaving, black fur matted with gore. He threw back his head and released a long, echoing howl, a victor's cry that resonated through the cavern. The sound swiftly faded into the endless depths of Black Reach. For a moment, I simply watched him, my broken dagger still clutched in one hand. My savagery was pale in comparison to that. I'd never seen anything like it. I'd seen werewolves in battle before, but never side by side with one, and never like this. He had been magnificent, in a terrifying way, and now I was alone in the chamber with him, both of us covered in blood. The great wolf's glowing eyes then shifted to me. An icy prickle ran up my spine as we regarded each other in the pale moonbeam shining down from the focusing crystal above. My rational mind knew that the man inside that beast had cause to hate me just as much as he'd hated our captor. Werewolves and vampires, they don't often shake hands and go separate ways. Under Hircine's curse, the beast might still thirst for blood. My blood. Now that that immediate threat was all gone, perhaps I was next. Cautiously, I took a step back, raising my empty hand. I was injured and unarmed. If he attacked, I would not last long. The werewolf huffed, stepping over the necromancer's shredded remains toward me, each heavy footfall splashed in blood. He was a nightmare of shadow and fang, silhouetted in that pillar of moonlight. I tensed up, baring my fangs reflexively, though I had little fight left to back it up. The werewolf sniffed the air between us. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. I realized I was still holding my shattered shackles like makeshift flails, so I let them drop with a clatter, doing my best to appear non-threatening. My undead heart would have been hammering. Instead, it was a cold dread coiled inside of me. Would our alliance of necessity end here in one final battle between natural, eternal enemies? The beast lowered its massive head until its snout was inches from my face. Hot breath, reeking of blood and carrion, blasted over me. I grimaced, but I held my ground, refusing to cower. His luminous eyes bore into mine. I stared back, forcing myself not to blink. Slowly, the werewolf extended his neck. But then, he did something unexpected. He pressed his wet nose to my cheek, inhaling deeply. I stood stock still. Was he scent marking me, testing if I was prey? The creature snorted, then gave a single, rough swipe of his tongue against the side of my face, lapping away a streak of blood that was not mine. I flinched at the unexpected gesture. He drew back and made a chuffing sound, almost like a canine satisfaction, and in that moment, peering past the feral mask, I fancied I saw a glint of the Nordman's own wry humor in those wolfish eyes. It was as if he was saying, "You taste horrible, but at least you're alive." I huffed a breathless laugh before I could stop myself. Oh, what a sight we must have been, both battered, burned, and bathed in blood, standing in the middle of a Dwemer ruin, far beneath the world. The werewolf's ears twitched at the sound of my laugh. He stepped back, and an odd calm settled over his posture. And then his form began to shudder and twist. With sickening pops and crackles, the hulking silhouette shrank, folding in on oneself. Black fur receded, claws shortened, muzzle contracting back into a more recognizable human face. In moments, the werewolf was gone, and the Nord staggered on two human legs, naked and gasping. The transformation back to a human, it's never a gentle process, at least from what I understand. He clutched his side where a cluster of ragged punctures from the shadow spell still oozed. A motley burn marred one shoulder. Yet, like me, he was alive. I moved without thinking, shrugging off my tattered cloak and stepping forward to drape it around the man's shoulders. He gave a start at my approach, reflectively baring teeth that were now merely human in form. But then, thinking better of it, he accepted the cloak, pulling it around his bruised body. We stood close, both swaying at our feet. But what was there to say? His eyes wandered the chamber, taking in the destruction, the extinguished ritual circle, the scattered remnants of the necromancer's body. And finally, his gaze settled on me. There was a flicker of uncertainty in those eyes now, unmasked by fury or moonlight. He looked younger than I'd thought, and very human. The tension between us was thick, sure, born by centuries of enmity between our kinds, but there was something else that laid between us. A shared experience. Mutual survival. I offered the barest hint of a smile. "It appears," I rasped, throat raw, "we cheated him of his grand plan." The Nord huffed, a weary half-laugh. "It seems so." His voice was hoarse and deep, and he studied me wearily. "Are you going to survive?" I realized I must have looked half a corpse. Well, more of a corpse than usual. My clothes were charred and torn, skin blistered from lightning and fire, one arm hanging limp and broken at my side. But I could feel my vampiric healing already knitting away the worst of the damage. I nodded slowly. "I'll heal, given time." "And you?" "That was quite the display." He grimaced, one corner of his mouth quirking. "I'll live. Hurts like oblivion, but, well, I'll live. You fought well, too. For a leech, that is." A startled chuckle escaped me, somewhat more genuine this time. The hint of dry humor in his tone was unexpected. "And you fought well, too, for a dog," I replied, arching a brow. He barked out a short laugh, which quickly turned into a wince as the motion pained in his ribs. Silence fell again, but less tense now, replaced by an odd camaraderie. We had just been through something that few could comprehend. The fact that one of us had fur and the other was a blood drinker seemed almost incidental in the aftermath. But still, the old instincts, they die hard. His expression hardened slightly as he pulled the cloak tighter around himself. "This does not change what we are," he said quietly. "Come dawn, vampire, we're still enemies by nature." I nodded, finding my gaze drawn to the floor. It was true. By laws of both of our kinds, we should be currently trying to kill each other. But as I looked at him, this battered Nord, who had bled and nearly died beside me, I didn't feel any hatred. If anything, I felt kinship. Two toys of the Daedric gods. We'd saved each other's lives tonight. That's a bond not easily severed by old prejudice. "No," I agreed softly. "It doesn't change what we are. But perhaps it changes what we think of each other. I can't imagine ever calling a werewolf a friend. But you have my thanks. And my respect." He met my eyes, and after a moment's hesitation gave a slow nod. "You have mine as well." There was almost a hint of amusement in how he said the words. He took a deep breath, wincing again at his bruises, and glanced toward the tunnel leading out of the chamber. "We should get out of this pit, vampire." I limped to where the necromancer's scattered belongings lay, retrieving what remained of my gear. My coin purse was still miraculously intact, a small comfort, and I found my spare travel tunic, which I quickly donned to replace my ruined shirt. The Nord found his trousers, torn, but usable, and boots along with a battered iron sword that had belonged to one of the necromancer's earlier victims. I saw an unspoken question in his face. Do I need this? Just in case. I pretended not to notice. I turned away, fastening my belt. The beam of moonlight from above had shifted, already fading as the cosmic timing of the ritual passed. In the dim glow of the fungi and crystals, we stood near the cavern's exit tunnel. The Nord's features were set in a neutral, tired mask. I'm sure mine looked much the same. Well, until next time. If there is a next time, the werewolf said quietly. He stretched out my hand, and we shook hands once. It wasn't exactly a friendly salutation, but it was better than the alternative. Just an acknowledgement. As I released his hand, I replied back to him. Pray that in the future, our paths do not cross under worse circumstances. Farewell, and good hunting. A ghost of a smile touched his lips at that. He pulled the cloak I had lent to him tighter, and then turned, trudging up the sloping tunnel toward one of Blackreach's giant lifts that would return him to the surface world. I watched until his silhouette melted into the dark, and for a moment I was there, alone in that cavern, surrounded by quiet and the glowing mushrooms swaying softly in the air. Who would believe such a tale? A vampire and a werewolf working in tandem, even saving each other. Even in all my hundreds of years, I thought such a thing to be impossible. And yet, under that pale moonlight, in the depths of Blackreach, it happened. He and I shed blood together, and not by each other's hand. Maybe there's a lesson in that, but that's a contemplation for another time. And so ends this night of blood and moonlight, a night I shall not soon forget. I emerged from that darkness a little wiser. My thirst for vengeance slacked, and my life unexpectedly spared by a cursed adversary. The great cavern of Blackreach keeps our secret, witnessed only by silent, glowing crystals and the ghosts of the Dwemer shadows. Come dawn, the world will know nothing of what transpired here. But I know. He knows. Under the earth and the moon, the vampire and the werewolf, who survived. And in that shared victory, however fleeting, a spark of mutual honor binds that night to our memory.